of the Planning and Transportation Commission meeting, and there's some feedback going on. I can hear it. I want to first establish a quorum, which we have everybody here except Commissioner Moisen, who we knew was going to be absent. The next item I have on our agenda is public comments not on the agenda. I have two speakers. If there's anybody who wants to speak on any of these topics, please make sure that you fill out a green card. And the other thing I'd like to remind people, I don't have mine, but the cell phones, if you have a cell phone, please make sure it's on vibrate or off so that during the meeting we're not interrupted. With that, I'd like to call Mr. Gary Hedden. He will have 3 minutes to speak on his topic, which is the community choice energy.
Good evening, honored commissioners. I'm Gary Hedden, 605 Harrington Avenue in Los Altos. I am on the Environmental Commission, and tonight I'm actually speaking on behalf of the Commission. We would like to urge you and everyone else, for that matter, to come to a community meeting next Wednesday at Lacey, and we will discuss, or it will be presented, a presentation on community choice energy, which is basically, in the simplest terms, we will buy the electricity for PG&E. Turns out that Marin County and Sonoma County can purchase renewably sourced electricity that comes from solar, wind, biomass, at a lower price than PG&E. So we want to find out if that's a possibility for Los Altos. So come to the meeting next Wednesday, learn all about it.
At what time?
It's in the evening. It starts at 6:30. There will be refreshments starting at 6, and it'll run until 8 o'clock. Melody Tovar is the presenter. She's from the staff of the City of Sunnyvale, and she is very knowledgeable and a good presenter, so I encourage you to be there and learn all about it.
That's at the Youth Commission. That's at the Youth Commission.
The Youth Center. The Youth Center, just right over there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Oh, I have flyers. If anybody wants a flyer.
Thanks, Gary. Next I have Abigail, who's going to speak on U-turn at signage at Main Street.
Abigail Ahrens, and traffic patterns are something to always watch, but until we got the hotel open, I would never have guessed how many people U-turn in front of the hotel on a daily basis. We've all experienced the shopper anxious to get the spot across the street who crosses the double yellow lines. Those are occasional. This is consistent and constant, so I had to ask why. The picture that you see on the screen, I think, is the reason why. I took that picture this morning, not fully standing in the traffic lane, but as you approach San Antonio Road, Edith, from Main Street, what you will notice is a confusing set of signs. Am I allowed to turn left on Edith and head to Foothill Expressway or back into town, or am I not? Can I make a U-turn or can I not? So if your car is just slightly past the sign on the left, you think the sign ahead of you is the one you should be obeying. I think we need to do something about this, and the reason I selected to say something this evening is the council's considering wayfinding signs. Yes, finally. And it looks like we have an opportunity to get some new signage. This is definitely an intersection that is sorely in need, and I felt as those in charge of traffic, you were the right commission to bring this to. If I want to go from the hotel and come back into town, making the right turn on San Antonio, I go more than a half a mile before I reach a street that I can turn right on and come into town. Or the alternative, and fortunately the View Street, Mount Hamilton neighborhood isn't here, is that you make a left turn into the residential area and circle back. Neither of those are very appealing options, and that's why people are U-turning in front of the hotel. So thank you. I really hope that you'll take this opportunity to bring this in front of staff, and I want to thank staff for being willing to put this picture up in front of you.
So, Abby, question for you. Is the solution to allow the U-turn at that intersection, or do you have a suggestion as to what the right solution is, other than eliminate the confusing signs?
I would say at a minimum, let's turn left on Edith, having watched how the signage works and what's coming and going. There shouldn't be any reason that we're preventing people from making a left on Edith, which would bring them back into town on city downtown streets, as opposed to going into the residential neighborhoods. It also would allow them to get to Foothill to go either north or south.
And this is from Main Street? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
You're talking about from Main Street.
Exactly.
I know the answer, actually, to why that's not a left turn allowed, is that this traffic coming north or southbound on San Antonio Road gets a green arrow to cross. So a car going left would cause a conflict there. But I think this is for staff really to look at, right?
And for Chief Eunice.
And for Tuck Eunice for looking at the enforcement of this.
So I understand what you're saying, but the timing isn't exactly that. So having been there quite a bit lately, I think we need to deal with this before there's a really serious accident out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who has public comment not on the agenda? Seeing nobody else, I'm going to close public comment. The next item of business is for the consent calendar. We have a number of minutes that have been given to us. So I was going to, in order of date, I have the first one being the November 5th. This is the study session on November 5th.
I have a comment on.
Do you want to turn your mic on?
Sorry.
That's all right.
On the second page, on the fourth bullet, under Commissioner comments included, I swear to God that we didn't want to include color. My memory is completely different from this. And I would look to my fellow commissioners
I'm sorry,
on this.
which
It says, the commissioner comments included requiring PTC review of downtown building color changes might be appropriate. I don't believe that we ever do color, and I don't believe that was part of
The conversation?
what our comments were. I think our comments were the opposite. But I
don't remember that either.
mean, I wonder if that was part of the discussion of nothing else happening to a building except a new paint job. Per the makery, I think that might have been in that context, in which case there is no review because people are allowed to paint their buildings any color they want.
In the context of facade changes and color changes?
If that's the, if they're only, if an occupant of a commercial property is painting the outside of their building, are they subject to color review at this time?
They are by staff.
Okay, but whether, I think my understanding is we didn't think it rose to the level of PTC review.
that would have been my view, but
Yeah. So what I hear David saying is that if we could approve the minutes, barring that this one item would be looked at by staff.
so I have other comments.
Okay.
The bullet recommendations on downtown design guidelines and processes, under the discussion of having an architectural consultant, the question that was raised was when in the process, and that's not included in the minutes.
On page 2?
On page 2.
Down towards the bottom, the
right.
fifth bullet from the
Right.
bottom.
I'm sorry.
No, am I on the right one? This is November 5th?
Yeah, the fifth bullet on the bottom says having our architectural
Architectural
consultant
consultant, that
might
might
benefit the city. But
Right.
Who
The
who
question-
said that?
go ahead, John.
The point I raised was, when in the process do you do it? At the very beginning? Do you do it when a final design is approved? So the question was, if you decide it's a good thing, the other question is, when do you do it? So, like the minutes annotated accordingly.
Do you have that, David?
Okay.
Any other corrections?
So, motion to approve, subject to the changes and staff verifying the record with regard to the color change comment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
I'm
opposed?
abstaining as I wasn't there.
Okay. We have 2 abstentions. So it's 4-0-2. Okay, next minutes were the ones on November 19th.
Can
This
I
is also a study session? Sure.
interject real quick? I, a few weeks ago, sent to you and to planning staff minutes that were prepared for since this was a joint study session, I know it says special meeting, but in fact, it was noticed as a joint study session meeting of the Planning Commission and the Citywide Parking Committee. I sent minutes that were prepared for submission and review by the Parking Commission, and they didn't get distributed, but I think that they are more comprehensive and reflect in more detail the questions and concerns, and I'd like the commission to review it and then determine which minutes is a more accurate reflection of the meeting. So I don't know that that can be done on the dais. I'd suggest that maybe planning send it around so that everyone can review it, and then we come back and discuss it.
I mean, we can circulate that, but the minutes are prepared by staff, they're prepared by me in this case, and they're from the commission's perspective. It was technically a commission meeting. So we can circulate them for information.
All right, I'll share them, and then we can pull line by
My
line.
understanding is
can-
we do action minutes. I mean, that's been our norm.
Yeah.
That's how we
So
do things.
I-
They
So
can
that-
be,
I would
they
like
can
to-
be added to the record, they could be added, but they will not be the city's official minutes. You can always submit something to the record, and if you want them to be submitted when these recommendations go to the council, those could be included in the packet, but they will not be deemed official minutes of that meeting. It's the city's minutes or the official minutes of the meeting, but we can include them so that the planning commissioners can see them and also the council members.
Well, I'd like to approve the minutes.
Oh, no, wait, Phoebe's got a comment.
On the third bullet of page 1, it's wordsmithing. Could we please say that the building areas such as lobbies should be counted in the floor area instead of having a double negative, please? Thank you.
Yes.
And I thought that on the fourth bullet, perhaps there would be a parentheses that would say sunset clause.
Where are you?
Policies could be used to test future changes, which would allow for easier future adjustments if necessary. And I think we might put in parentheses, i.e. sunset clause.
Motion to approve as amended?
I'll second.
Okay. So first, second, anybody more comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed. I don't think they accurately reflect the meeting.
Okay. And any abstention? Okay. So it's 5-1? The next minutes I have are for the December 17th meeting. Any corrections? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second?
I'll second.
You guys are staying in the tag team. All those, any more comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Opposed, and Phoebe's abstaining, so it's 501. Perfect. Moving along to item number 2, the public hearing on the municipal code amendment. Jolie, are you starting us off?
Yes, I'll just give a brief update from my memo that was in the packet. in 2010, the Los Altos Code was amended to add a prohibition of medical marijuana dispensaries, and that was located in the business license chapter. Current legislation requires an expansion of that section to prohibit the cultivation or commercial cultivation of medical marijuana or any type of marijuana in the city. And as my memo says, there were 3 recent bills, AB 243, AB 266, and SB 643, and this is now known as the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act. So this act establishes the minimum standards for a regulatory program regarding the medical marijuana industry, and especially the cultivation, processing, transportation, and distribution of medical marijuana. And under the most relevant bill, AB 243, a local agency must expressly prohibit or regulate the cultivation of medical marijuana by March 1st, 2016. Since, and it isn't really, it's in our business license chapter, but since the time we've adopted the prohibition of medical marijuana, the case law has developed, and the medical marijuana is being regulated or prohibited through zoning, through land use controls, and having it be in our zoning code will be more defensible and would be more of a land use regulation. So we're not regulating the business, we're actually regulating the land use. So with this bill coming up to prohibit or to regulate cultivation, we use this time to remove the prohibition of medical marijuana and the delivery of marijuana that is now contained in Chapter 4 to move it into the zoning and also add the prohibition of commercial cultivation of medical marijuana. So that's what we're doing. We're repealing the Chapter 4.45 and we're adding a new Chapter 14.A2 regarding medical marijuana, and it will prohibit the dispensing of medical marijuana, the delivery, and the commercial cultivation. And I can answer any more questions. So that's why it's here. It's because it's in the zoning, and per state law, all zoning ordinances must go through the Planning Commission.
You think these reasons are defensible in court? I mean, you wrote it. The one about high wattage grow lights being a clear and present danger to the building was a little stretched for my taste based on LEDs.
Yeah, I think they're defensible. The lights, the smell, they're all the problems with medical marijuana and the cultivation, especially with the grow houses, the large scale ones. They are quite a nuisance. They're costly enforcement actions for the police or code enforcement. So
I have no problem with that. What I'm saying is I'm not sure that you can say high wattage grow lights present a clear and present danger, considering that the technology for grow lights has changed, so you no longer need high wattage. And I'm only saying this because there might be a way for you to tweak it that makes it better. Because right now, it's, to me, I think it's not really defensible.
well,
Think about it.
I'll think about it, but I'm not sure that all of the grow houses are using.
All you need is one.
Well, no, we're talking about where this is really tailored. It's not one light bulb for one plant. We're talking about people that convert homes into grow houses, and they may not use the most.
But I'm saying if they do,
Economically.
then they'll go to court and say, well, I'm not a clear and present danger because I'm using low energy bulbs.
Well, okay, I'll look at that when it goes up to council. But thank you.
And I had a question regarding, so I was trying to understand, this is talking about commercial growing versus somebody has a personal use or personal need and they grow their own.
Yeah. So the medical marijuana and the processing and growing, it does say that except where the city is preempted by federal or state law. So this can be defined to be clear, but if you have a medical marijuana card and you're growing 6 or fewer plants, this wouldn't prohibit you. But if you want to You can be clear and say that you want to ban all all cultivation, or we can clarify.
I just want to make sure it was
Yeah.
just for commercial use.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
just,
that
the
makes
way it
sense to
is written right now is actually more of the reasonable approach, sort of the middle of the line approach, where if you have a medical marijuana card and you're a qualified patient and you have 6 or fewer plants and someone calls the police on you and they go out, they don't take your plants because they can't do that because you're a qualified patient. So, and all these terms, primary caregiver, qualified patient, they're all defined in the Medical Marijuana Act and also the Compassionate Use Act. So what we're trying to target is the large-scale nuisance grow houses.
Any questions, discussion?
I move that we recommend adoption. Is that what the action would be, staff? I move that we recommend adoption to council of the ordinance repealing the Los Altos Muni Code, Chapter 4.45, amending the Muni Code, Section 14.02, and adding new Chapter 14.82 regarding the prohibition of cultivation, possession, no, that must be possession, delivery and dispensing of marijuana throughout the city of Los Altos.
Second, John?
This is a public hearing.
Yep. Oh, I forgot.
Sorry.
I didn't have any public comment cards. I was going to make a mention of that, too.
Sorry.
But is there anybody in the public that'd like to comment? Now's the time. Seeing none, I will close public comment.
Ditto.
Now we have a motion and the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 6-0. Okay. That brings us to item number 3, the Downtown Buildings Committee recommendations. And before, I just want to talk to everybody about what this motion, or what, I'm sorry, what the, I want to say the agenda, but how we're going to, I was thinking about running this and just wanted to see if this works for everybody, because there are a lot of things that we have to talk about. And what I thought, and John has to be recused for A and C. So what I thought was we'd have a staff report. We'd give roughly 10 minutes to what we normally do for the commission to present themselves. That's our normal process. And then as we went and discussed these things, John would be recused for A and C. We would talk about A and C, decide what we want to do. Then once those are resolved, then we bring John back and resolve the rest of these items, or discuss the rest of these items. Does that seem reasonable?
So in terms of the recommended order and grouping that we have in our suggested,
Right.
we can tweak that a little to reflect that.
So A and C, you'll see, are called out as the first 2 items, and that was why. And thank you, Zach, for putting this together. We were trying to figure out how to make this efficient. Okay, so it sounds like everybody's okay with that? I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. This group of recommendations that's before you tonight, this has been developed by the city's ad hoc Downtown Buildings Committee. This was originally formed by council back in November of 2014. The committee was seated in February of 2015 and consisted of 11 committee members, residents, as well as Councilmember Megan Satterley as the committee's facilitator. And from that time and through November, the committee worked on evaluating, and they were looking at a number of specific elements. After initially forming, they formed 3 subcommittees that focused, one on quality of materials, curb appeal, landscape, access to light, air views, and this is focused within the downtown triangle. The second subcommittee looked at height, tower elements, setbacks, variances, and public benefits. And the third subcommittee looked at application of the downtown design guidelines and overall policies and procedures to review and approve projects. The commission originally had a study session back in November, the minutes of which you approved tonight, to better understand and ask questions about the group of recommendations. And so before you tonight is that the reports. There are 2 reports from the Downtown Buildings Committee and a group of recommendations that the commission will be considering tonight, and then making a recommendation to the City Council. And after the commission takes action, these recommendations both from the committee and the commission, will move forward for council consideration, and then ultimately the council will take action on which ones they would like to see moved forward. Once the council takes action, then they will, those that are recommended to move forward, staff will then do a more detailed analysis and put together an implementation plan. Many of these items would involve code amendments, others address other aspects of the policies, handouts, and other tools and information that goes into the overall design review process. The evaluation provided by staff is more preliminary in nature and used to kind of help guide the commission as you work through these. But before we get into questions and comments, I do want to tee it over to Anita Ennender with the Downtown Buildings Committee, and she'll be presenting, followed by Susan Messinger for the second part.
So before I just want to make sure that, so what we're to do is to come up with a recommendation to council. These items we feel that they should, we support. These items we feel that we don't agree with, and these items, other items might be things that we look for the city council really for guidance, because we really are, it's not our jurisdiction, if you would. Is that fair to say that what we can? I'm trying to get everybody to understand what we need to do, so that as we go through these presentations, we're listening in that.
Yeah, the goal would be for the commission to review each recommendation or grouping of recommendations and provide feedback, either whether that's support, whether it's alternatives, whether you're concerned, and really your recommendations would factor into the council's ultimate actions that they take. So really, you're making a recommendation. So however you, with your body of knowledge and experience based on the design review process, that's the type of feedback that the council will be looking for from the commission tonight.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Good evening. Zach's going to be good enough to cue us up here. As he said, my name is Anita Enander. I'm a member of the Downtown Buildings Committee and a 37-year resident of Los Altos. For the benefit of the commission members who are new or were not at our study session in November, and for the public members who are with us tonight, we want to review briefly how the Downtown Buildings Committee approached its work over the past 10 months. We will then briefly comment on several of the recommendations that have been modified since that study session, but will not go item by item through them again. Council tasked the Downtown's Building Committee to evaluate developments completed since changes to downtown zoning in 2010 and to make recommendations so future developments will better meet community expectations. All members are residents from throughout the city who have lived here for somewhere between 5 and more than 45 years. We represent a wide variety of professional backgrounds, and as became apparent in our extended deliberations, we hold diverse viewpoints. We recognize the importance of our work because every new building downtown is not just a commercial effort by a builder and an owner, not just a workplace for employees, but an element of our downtown that will be experienced by generations of Los Altans for more than 50 years. Our goals were to guide future development that is both commercially viable and reflects the community interest in retaining the unique character of our town, and to make the development process smoother and more transparent for all: developers, staff, commissioners, council, and residents. The result should be high-quality developments with predictable impacts, ensuring there are no surprises for developers or residents. We visited and analyzed 161st, 400 Main in the CRS zone, 343 2nd and 243rd Streets in the CD zone, 101st and 396 First in the CDR3 zone, and 1 Main in the CRS OAD zone. After our initial review and analysis, comparing the buildings to the applicable zoning and guidelines, we formed 3 subcommittees, which held more than 24 meetings, and Zach's already told you about those 3 subcommittees. We also reviewed the results of the 2 surveys commissioned by the city, and we are grateful for the support of Councilwoman Satterley, who managed to keep us on track, City Manager Summers, and city staff, in particular Zach, who met with many of us during this past 10 months. Each member spent many additional hours on research and preparation. This included consultation with and collection of information from planning departments in other communities, and we benefited from the very helpful study session with you all in November. All recommendations were thoroughly discussed by the subcommittees and then by the full committee during one or more of its 12 public meetings. The recommendations before you represent many hours of work, extended discussion, and compromise. Perhaps the most extensive discussions in our early meetings were to try to determine if the problems we identified were the result of inadequate zoning and guidelines, which could be corrected by revisions to those documents, or of interpretation, application, or lack of enforcement. The reports before you reflect these distinctions. The first deals with zoning and guidelines that support our village character. These are our recommended changes to the written rules, as it were. The second suggests how to improve the documentation, processes, and procedures to ensure that the expectations of developers and residents are met. We begin with a recommendation that the committee endorsed unanimously as its most key recommendation, reductions to the maximum height allowed at buildings and structures in the CD and CDR3 zones. Following our study session with you, we revised our height recommendations so they are coordinated with the definitions and setback requirements already provided in the code. Commercial and mixed-use developments in CD or CDR3 zones, which require 2-foot setbacks, would be restricted to 30-foot height. Residential developments in the CDR3 zone, which are currently required to have a greater 10-foot setback, would be permitted a 35-foot height. It is our view that the additional setback adequately ameliorates the impact of the greater height. We recognize that approving these changes would make several buildings that were completed since 2010, the 2010 zoning changes, to be non-conforming. But we also note that Council has already made code changes that made some of the new buildings, including 100 First, 400 Main, and 1 Main, non-conforming in some fashion. We also note that while being non-conforming can present issues for owners, this has not been a block to making capital improvements to the building at First and State Street, which, as you know, has recently been granted a waiver to put solar energy on the roof, even though it is already an overheight building. In any case, the unanimous view of our committee is that it is not in the best interest of Los Altos to continue to further develop these areas under the present height standards, which are 45 feet. Recommendations regarding ancillary architectural features and appurtenances remain as presented in the study session. Following that study session, we made a few tweaks to issues regarding bulk and mass, sidewalks, pedestrian safety, evaluating the impact of shadows on proposed developments, and so on, and I'm not going to comment further on those. So we're going to move here to protecting views, and I just want to offer you a few images. And by the way, in keeping with your new requirement to developers, all of these are approximately 50 millimeter equivalent. They are full frame, and they have not been photoshopped nor cropped. The issue of preserving and protecting views is a novel concept in Los Altos. It is not currently addressed in our zoning or in other guidelines, so we are recommending that it be taken up for further study and ultimately that rules be adopted to preserve the major views from the downtown. This shows how one development affected views at the southbound entrance to town. Some other examples are primary intersections, Main Street, State Street, the foothills along southbound San Antonio. And I want to point out that it's not just the foothills that we're concerned about, but also the canopy of trees that are such an integral part of our city. And although this is a matter for further study, it has some urgency as demonstrated by the impact that the current construction will soon have on that view. So whatever we do or don't do in this regard will affect our town for many decades. Turning then to the pedestrian experience with landscaping, we found huge variations in quality and extent of landscaping despite what is in the code and guidelines. The extra landscaping setback that we suggest, however achieved, can have a huge benefit, and this is an example of a 3-foot bed. Alternatively, one can rely on the goodwill of the developer and the persuasiveness of staff and this commission. There are some areas where we have really serious concern about what was approved, and we obviously have shop owners who would like to be trying to do something better than what they seem to have room to do. It may interest you to know, by the way, that the contractor who maintains almost 100 planting pots for the Village Association has developed a sun exposure map for downtown to aid in selecting plants for each of those pots. And I think that's an example of the kind of resource that should be exploited and made available to developers. Finally, building materials, the recommendation you have before you is very much what you saw previously. We just want to point out again that there's a huge variation in what we perceive as the quality of building materials, this being very nice, this perhaps being somewhat more inferior. And we also noted that building materials cannot compensate for poor design and, in fact, might even make it worse. The one thing about which there was absolute unanimity is that we do not want to be Mountain View. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Susan to finish the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Which is that? What do you, just
That one goes forward.
Thank you. Good evening. As Anita mentioned, we did a lot in the study session. I want to thank you again, as well as the staff members and Megan who've worked with us on this rather long journey. I'm going to talk about documents, process, and procedures, and I think we're in, oh, they've already reordered it. Never mind. Okay. What we were trying to do is go back to the question of why we were formed when we took on this task, and that was to say we want to really eliminate any surprises in the community and that we meet community expectations. And so we focused on looking at whether the documents were adequate and consistent, is the process smooth and predictable, and how can we improve that such that it benefits everybody. The idea being, at the end of the day, if we do those things, we're going to have quality development that we deserve, and we are going to meet community expectations. We were actually a little surprised. When we looked at it, we found that documents actually probably were not the problem. There are some problems with them, but the actual content was good. And you can see there are just, frankly, way too many documents. So you have a problem of coherence. They're kind of repetitive and confusing. And here's pulling different documents that kind of are saying the same thing, but kind of aren't saying the same thing. And as I mentioned, the documents really haven't been the problem. The problem is really how do you enforce what is in the documents and the guidelines that are already there. And you can see, just going through the buildings that we did look at, you can see you get a lot of variety, and some people like...
That just means 10 minutes.
Okay. Some people like the design, some people don't like the design, but nonetheless the community was often surprised. So here are our recommendations. We suggest that we simplify and clarify the documents. We provide a very precise checklist, and that is something that other communities do. We provided in the materials to you an example of what Los Gatos calls for, which is a very detailed checklist. And in talking with various development professionals and architects in the community as part of our research, we learned that they actually love having a detailed checklist because it's very clear for them what they need to do then to meet what is expected for development in Los Altos. The other aspect of that is from a staff perspective. It allows staff to very clearly see where are we perhaps not meeting the guidelines and addressing it. Do we want to meet them? Do we not? Or what kind of flexibility are we allowing? And it allows us as the public to also look at that checklist and say, but what about this or what about that? And I'm sure Zach will speak to this later, but those first two recommendations staff supported and said it was something that they could do administratively. Our third recommendation, and this again came out of our meetings talking to a variety of development professionals in the adjacent communities, was to require an ad hoc architectural panel review. I know there was a fair amount of discussion at the study session about that, and I know staff also has some concerns about how you would structure that. What we learned in talking with people is that other communities do it. Mountain View does it, Palo Alto does it, Los Gatos does it, and it's optional. They pay for it. And it's fully architectural experts, either landscapers or building design. And the benefit was they frankly get an early preview to see if things can be improved and not have something drag out for 2 years, as in the case of Loyola Corners, and then find there's a problem with it. So we strongly suggest that that is something that needs to be examined and hopefully implemented. The last two are just to enforce the rules and standards. They're there, but there has been a problem with adhering to them. And then we also just want to say we support the downtown visioning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have any more to say?
I might, depending on how you want to do it, you may want to open it up for public comment at this point, or if there's technical questions for either staff or the committee, we are available.
My only concern is with Mr. Bear and Commissioner Bear about A and C. If I open public comment, does that mean if they address those issues, I need help here?
You could take public comment, but he shouldn't participate until he can listen, but I wouldn't.
So
Yeah.
we'll let the public comment, and then at that point, we'll close it, and then
He recuses, and
himself.
then, yes.
Okay, fine.
Because you have to take his,
At least he can hear.
the things that he has a conflict on first.
Right. So with that, I'm going to open public comment, and first up I have is Bill Mattson. You must have put it on top, because I didn't realize. And followed by Gary Hedden.
So before I begin, are we going to be doing this individually, or would you like comments in every category? Meaning, I'd like to actually just talk on A, and then when you get to C or D.
No, we have to take it all in once.
Okay, so here I go.
And you have 3 minutes to do that, unfortunately.
Okay, so with that being said, I'll just start with the one of the two that I find most controversial, which is the idea of limiting height to 30 or 35 feet. To be honest with you, this is probably the most controversial, in fact, because it has a direct impact on a future visioning process, and it really has a long-term impact on the viability and economics of downtown. So I actually would not vote in favor of this recommendation, but rather let the future visioning process that determines what we want our downtown to be actually dictate the outcome in terms of dealing with height limitations. Prior, there was almost 4 to 6 years of different committees formed that actually created that zoning district in 2010. So I'd hate to see it be undone without understanding the economic impacts of doing that. With that being said, interesting enough, I really like the feedback on almost all the other recommendations in here. I thought that planning staff's comments also were very neutral and productive. So, very well done. Couple other things, though, regarding towers. As architectural features, I wouldn't want to, as an architect, to have someone say to me that I can't build up as a way of reducing massing. What happens when you lower buildings and don't allow architectural articulation? It actually increases the massing. It doesn't reduce the massing. So that one should actually be looked at quite closely. The other thing regarding the use of materials, what's very difficult if you're in an area where we're seeing change, if I'm matching my materials with a building that actually might not exist in 5 years, that can have its own set of problems. So actually having more of a grand plan of the type of textures you'd like to see 50 years from now rather than what's next door in a 50-year-old building might be a better way to approach it. So actually, I don't want to use the Santa Barbara effect, but they came up with a palette that was used consistently through all of the town, and then they avoided that whole issue of I did it first, so everybody else has to match what I did. So with that, the idea of moving on to shadowing diagrams, our software now can do it with the click of a button. So to me, if someone says they want to know what solar impacts are on my building, I literally can do that in less than a minute. So I'm not concerned about that. It actually has lots of benefits, and if integrated with the landscape program, it can also help dictate the type of landscaping that would grow appropriately in those areas when a new building is built. Thank you. Wish I had more time.
Bill, just for the record, I don't think you gave your name and address.
Oh, sorry. Bill Maston, local resident and architect.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Hedden, and then next up I have John Barton.
Good evening again, Gary Hedden. I'm on the Environmental Commission, but I'm speaking for myself. I read the Downtown Buildings Report, and it's very well done. I certainly support less bulk in the design of downtown buildings. and in some cases, a lot less bulk. Having said that, there's a competing interest these days in walkable communities and the desire for housing, apartments, and condos within 1/4 to 1/2 mile of downtown. This is especially of interest to seniors who are looking to downsize and move from the suburbs. I can't tell from the report, but was this interest considered? What is the impact on mid-density housing from the proposed setbacks, height restrictions, and the difficult-to-define protection of the views of the foothills? Were experts brought in to talk about current thinking in urban design? We want to protect village charm, but if we block development, we may end up with loads of charm and vacant stores on Main Street, and vacant stores are not charming. I urge you to consider walkable, sustainably built cities in your planning, and it should be in this report. Without it, to me, the report is incomplete. Thank you.
Then I have John Barton, and next up after John is, I want to say Mayor McDonald? Emmer? Gotcha.
Good evening. My name is John Barton. I've been a 15-year resident of Los Altos. Prior to that, I had a business in Mountain View for 12 years where we frequented Los Altos as well. So I've been a longtime user of downtown Los Altos. I live here now with my wife and children. Yeah, I've got 4 young children. And I've now become an investor in downtown Los Altos. So I'm investing for the long term. I'm not a developer that brings profits to another part of the country. I'm someone that wants to see a nice, vibrant downtown. So when I've reviewed the report, similar to what Bill Maston said, I'm very concerned about the height limitations. I think we saw a lot of examples of poorly done buildings. I think there are also some beautiful buildings, and I don't think it's a matter of height. I agree with some of the things Susan said about the architectural review, a common vision for downtown, but I don't think it is a height issue per se. I will say, is in terms of someone who has chosen to invest in downtown Los Altos, a community that I love, if these provisions were in place, I would not invest in the property that I've already purchased. I would also say that adopting these is going to significantly reduce the value of the property that I now own. So it in a sense has been a punishment for investing in Los Altos. So I would urge that there's probably a better solution than just strictly limiting it to height only, and also consider some more of the impacts. For instance, we're considering mixed use, so the combined impact when you have a mixed use property. So thank you.
And Emmerich, followed by Abigail Ahrens.
Hi, my name's Emmerich McDonald, and looking somewhat similar to John Barton. As it turns out, we are friends, and the situation is somewhat parallel. We're also investing partners together in what he described. Similarly, I became a resident of Los Altos in 2010, so I can consider myself a short-term, so far, resident compared to many of the folks that I've happily met here in this friendly town. Was married a year and a half ago, now live off of View Street, a block from town, which is fantastic. My wife, my young baby, 1-year-old, as well as her previous children, stepchildren, love coming into town, really enjoy it. We would love to see more development in town. I think it's wonderful that things were established the way they were initially 50, 60 years ago. But when we see other towns throughout the peninsula, we see more in the towns, and much is changing. We have a huge global company, 5-6 miles down the road, and there is just a tremendous influx of a new demographic coming in. And we're looking for more vibrancy for our own family. I love the mission statement, which is my first time here and reading this, and specifically the things I key on are, to raise a family and specifically foster, which means to encourage the development of. And one of the things in the document that I read was a survey that was taken, and it turns out 23% of survey residents indicated that they wanted no new development in downtown. I mean, I just take that as, not realistic at its face, and somewhat has to be discounted. And when you ask people, would you like 30 feet or 35 feet or 45 feet, they're not sure exactly what that means. If I ask my wife how tall is 30 feet, she's not going to say, oh, that right up there. What that means is two-story buildings. Two-story buildings across the entirety of downtown, that just doesn't seem realistic. And again, although I know there's been some discontent with the quote canyoning effect of First Street with the Safeway store and so on, which is a fantastic place to shop for a young family who's eating a lot of groceries. It can be dealt with more effectively with additional setbacks at higher levels and so on. But to say, hey, we're going to squash this town down to 2 stories all the way across the board seems extreme and an overreaction to maybe some slightly ineffective decision making that may have been done on a couple of different building projects. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And last speaker I have is Abigail Aaron. Oh, and
we have an amazing community and exemplary residents, 11 of them serving on this ad hoc committee. I sat through the formation council. I did not hear or see that this group of residents was charged with developing standards. Unlike the 6 years Bill alluded to, in this particular group, you have 11 residents, 1 city council member, and a staff member assisting. In 2010, we had 2 city council people, 2 planning commissioners, 2 staff, city manager, 2 architects, 2 stakeholders, 1 developer, and 1 commercial realtor. That is a far different group of people to help create development standards in this community. It was really important, and I laud Megan in creating an opportunity for residents to voice themselves. But when residents step into an arena that requires a knowledge base that I didn't notice, I went through the backgrounds of all of the people on there. I didn't see any architects. I didn't see any property owners, because by purpose. Downtown is an American word. It was, if you look it up, created in the early 1800s in New York City. If you look in the dictionary, it's the commercial heart of a city. Views have never been a consideration for downtown. So the purpose, therefore, and I must mention that the most celebrated downtown building in terms of awards is the Packard Foundation building. If, however, you're in an office building across from it, it blocks views on San Antonio for a block. I'd like to address 2 other things. Landscape continuity, I say no. And I think all of you know that I'm huge on landscape. I can tell you that the espalier is a French word for the absolutely charming little apples and things that are growing alongside the hotel delight children, they catch gardeners, and people come in and say, what are those? Those boxwood gardens, you might not have put that on a contemporary building, but I think the nuance of what these people are really trying to say is more landscaping, and I laud it completely and agree with them. There are new codes and new laws that they aren't familiar with. For example, our new emergency responder system requires higher height than what we've got at 8 feet. Those codes and laws must be taken into consideration. You must understand them in order to create standards and laws.
thank you. I have Kelly Snyder up next. I don't know, Zach, if you could change the...
Should I go ahead though?
Yeah. Oh, make sure you introduce yourself and put your name. Thanks.
Sure. My name is Kelly Snyder. I am an employee in Los Altos. I am the director of a landholder in a real estate company called Pastoral Investments in downtown Los Altos. I've read through, really just glanced over the report and all of the work that the committee has done, and it looks like a ton of work. And like many of the speakers before me, I would say in general, many of the recommendations seem really sound, especially the ones that you just had your planner take off. The visioning process, establishing a set of standards which are enforced and clearly documented and easy for property owners or developers or investors to follow, all great ideas. The one thing that I am here to express strong concern about is the potential to reduce the total height limit in the downtown core from 45 feet to 30 or 35 feet. Like many of the speakers who have spoken before you tonight, the impacts of making a fairly reactionary and unsubstantiated decision at this point when so many other things are on the table, such as parking amendments or new specific plans or community and civic center plans that may be coming up in the next year or two, would potentially be quite dire. I've worked in real estate and urban planning and urban revitalization for almost every single city and town in Santa Clara County over my career in the past 20 years. And I can tell you that Los Altos is the envy of almost all of them. You have exactly what many other cities have had to build from scratch. You have a beautiful downtown infrastructure, gorgeous streetscapes, great existing trees, lovely shopping streets. You have some really good zoning policies with your retail-only shopping streets. And you've done really beautiful work in the last several years with the 45-foot height limit. Beauty is always in the eye of the beholder, and some people may love the 100 Main development or the Safeway development, and many other people do not. But it is true that without having the ability to develop to a reasonable reinvestment standard, such as 2.5 or 3 stories or a third story setback, something that 40 or 45 feet would allow, that none of this new investment would be happening. And many of the vacancies that you see in your 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-old buildings now, more of them that I noticed on Main Street just over the holiday period, unfortunately are probably going to continue. So I urge you to think very carefully about that particular recommendation. Keep the existing height limits as they are until a more comprehensive and holistic approach can be taken to how the downtown can continue to prosper and take advantage of the beautiful city that you've developed over the past 50 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final speaker I have is Jim Cook. If there's anybody else, please let me know.
Yeah, I'm Jim Cook. I don't live in Los Altos currently. I grew up in Los Altos from the time that I was 3 years old. And I do own a building downtown, or in the village, rather. Maybe downtown's not the right word for it. And I am an investor, developer, and have been a commercial real estate broker for 35 years. Our building, we bought it 25 years ago. We have no intention of redeveloping it. I don't have a dog in the fight from the standpoint of trying to see something accomplished for my property to realize any value. Rather, other than what I think is important for the quality of the village. The main problem with what I've heard and seen so far is that height limitation. I personally think the Safeway is an abomination. I don't know what its height is. Is it 30 feet or less? It's above that. But I think its biggest problem is its width, its presence on the street. I think smaller projects that allow greater height, smaller in number of lots that are assembled in order to create them, keep the more jewel box kind of developments, keep the downtown to maintain the kind of charm that was just mentioned. And I think that's, better accomplished by not forcing down the height, because when one redevelops that way, you then have to maximize your lot coverage in order to make the project feasible. And if you can add the third floor, get your other unit up there, and have some articulation, whatever the right architectural word is, I think it adds to the character a lot. One other note, having done a number of projects in Palo Alto, There was a mention by the committee that an ad hoc architectural review would add to this concept of, what was the word? No surprises to the public or the developer, and I don't think that's the case. I love architectural review. I think as a developer, it's a wonderful process. However, I think it surprises the public on a regular basis because the ARB is made up of architects and experts, and the kinds of projects that they tend to encourage include some of the pictures that the committee showed were what we don't want. Being Mountain View, which I think has some wonderful buildings, but just sort of that's more of a side note. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that'd like to comment on the presentation? Seeing none, I will close public comment, which brings us to...
I'm going to be recusing myself because I own real property within 500 feet of the downtown.
For the CD and CDR3?
Yes, for CD and CDR3.
Thank you, John. Does anybody wants to go first? I'm going to turn John's mic on. Thanks. Seeing none, that way.
Phoebe would go first, I'm sure.
Think Phoebe? You bet you turn your mic on, though.
So I was very pleased with the staff report in many ways because I know that the committee made a tremendous effort with many, many person hours to pull together the document to analyze what the problems that were perceived to be addressed. What I found very helpful, which was something we brought up at our joint session, was that I felt that, as one of the speakers said, that the intentions were very good of the committee, but they didn't have enough specific expertise to integrate the code requirements or the general zoning principles or the general planning principles that staff has. And so I found the situation of having the DBC recommendation with a staff comment next to it very helpful, and it also was guiding me as well. So looking at the recommendation, which was for changing the height of structures, in attachment 1A, I do not agree with the recommendation, and my reasoning is as follows. For whatever being in the minority or majority, I have to say that I was on Planning Commission the first round I was on, and then there was a break, and this is the second round. And in that time, I've seen the town go from very dire economic straits when we were in the pits of the 2008 economic implosion, where there were many, many, many vacancies in our downtown core and also in our exterior commercial districts. And I believe that this raising of and revamping of the zoning code to go to form-based zoning without stories and floors and to higher limits, I attribute the increased development in town, therefore the increased number of feet on the ground, therefore the increased economic vitality. So I resist this one significantly on that basis. And then I should look at C because that's the other one John is recused from.
Yeah, do you want to talk, whether we talk about A altogether and then C altogether?
Whatever.
Does anybody have a preference?
I think we should go one by one.
Yeah, I think we'll just talk about A right then. That way, meaning, yeah. So, thank you, Phoebe.
You're welcome.
So on the... I also want to thank the committee for all their hard work. The documents look great. I'm quite impressed. I do also agree with Phoebe on that the limit on height is not quite the right way in my mind to go. I like to see more development on vitality, and I don't think having a 3-story or a 45-foot limit actually, makes for a worse, urban setting. I think if it's done properly, if it's, if there are some limitations on, or some sort of setback or some reduction of bulk on the third level, that there's definitely a possibility of having some beautiful, 3-story buildings in downtown. And from my understanding, is the 45-foot limit is the surrounding. It's not for the
Correct.
core. So the core is still going to remain, pedestrian in nature, and the height limit there, I think works out fine. But to have a little bit more on the surrounding zones where it's not so much of a pedestrian zone, it's a lot more of, driving back and forth. I think that would be just fine to keep it as it is.
Okay. Renee, do you want to?
Sure. So this is, I missed the study session, the joint study session. So I want to start by just saying I think that the goals that you identified and aspirations are really admirable. I think as a PTC, we want to make the process smoother. We want the highest quality development, and we certainly want to improve predictability. And I know, I can imagine, because I served on one of these other subcommissions, that the amount of time you spent volunteering and putting this together was probably hundreds of hours of time and a Herculean effort. So thank you for doing that. And, one of the reasons why I brought up the minutes earlier is because when you spend so much time, you really want to have the people who are reviewing it really thoughtfully consider it. And then when they have, you want that to be accurately reflected because you've invested so much time. So I want you to know that with respect to height, I'm not giving it a cursory review. This is not the first time I've thought about height and building height in our town. In fact, I recall when I was applying to be on the PTC, the one question I got about downtown was, do you think a 35-foot building should be 2 stories or 3 stories? So this is something that, height has been something that I've really thought about and, a lot in terms of our downtown. And what I've come to understand is the difference between 30 and 35 feet is really the difference between development and no development. And that is what is, the reason it was changed, I believe, in 2010, and it's stated in this report, is to encourage redevelopment. And that's exactly what happened. And I think, when I read over the 2015 survey, it's how the buildings look are really a very, in my mind, a small factor of the reasons for satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And when I look at the question 2, where it talks about reasons for satisfaction or dissatisfaction, the people who don't like the new buildings or don't like the architecture represent 12%, and the people who do like the new buildings and do like the architecture are 11.6%. And supposedly there's a margin of error of like 4% in this poll, and 400 people were polled. Everything else, all the other questions, go to lack of variety of restaurants, lack of activities, lack of atmosphere, shop restaurants closed too early, like activities, lack of parking. It's all about, it's not the look and feel of the specific buildings that went up, but the vibrancy and the vitality and the activity that people are seeing in the downtown. So I think when you look at the building height and you say reduce it to 30, what you are going to in effect do is to reduce development, which will have the effect of making all the people who feel that there isn't enough vibrancy, vitality, and activity in downtown be more dissatisfied. So I am strongly opposed to this recommendation. I don't like the idea of creating nonconformance of the new properties that were just built. We have just created what I think are I think some of them are really remarkable gateway buildings to downtown Los Altos. And you're going to make all of them nonconforming by changing this ordinance. And I think the better solution is actually to encourage development that is complementary to those buildings. And I also believe that the difference in 5 feet, I'm only 5'6". So if the difference is essentially my height, but it's an entire story, then what you're going to end up, if you have a 2-story building, then what you're forcing a developer to do in order to make it economically feasible is push out the envelope. So you will have lack of articulation and only increase bulk and mass. Whereas if you allow that 3rd story, you can actually get that articulation, which would lead to better design, in my view. And I think a lot of the people who have invested in downtown in the last 5 years have done so based on the development and vibrancy that they have seen, and this would just take that away. Height is really one factor in how, in my mind, we evaluate buildings' bulk and mass, but it's the only factor being considered as it's almost as if it's the most important factor in this recommendation. So I can't support it, and I think that the town is really, I agree that I wish that this commission, I wish there was a planning person on it, and I didn't quite get the makeup if there was, like a downtown property owner or a downtown business owner or a downtown resident or office worker or a broker or an architect. But I think if there is, then when you do present that to City Council, you should highlight that fact, because I think that participation is extremely relevant. And I think that it sounds to me like this commission is not quite as divided as the town in terms of whether to encourage more or less development. I mean, when I look at the 2015 survey, 42% think we need new and more office buildings and housing in downtown, and 42% thinks it would detract. So with a 4% margin of error, that means we're really a divided town. And it doesn't sound like that division is represented in this recommendation or reflected in this recommendation, so I can't support it.
Okay. Ken?
I was tremendously impressed with the amount of work and the quality of the work that was done by this committee. I can only imagine how difficult it was to have all the hours spent in the meetings that had to take place and the discussion back and forth as to what should be included in the report and the incredible number of details. So I'm grateful that we have such intelligent, articulate people. Just the presentations here tonight were very impressive. For this particular recommendation, I'm going to have to agree with my three previous female colleagues. I just don't think that this is the right kind of control that we need to put on the perimeter buildings in town. I actually like the way the town is developing, and it's smaller buildings in the inside, larger buildings around the perimeter. I know that every time that you build a building like that, it does have some impact on views, and I do enjoy the views. But I don't, I think there's a trade-off, and if we can't go back to the 1950s. We're not going to have two-story 1950s style buildings. It just doesn't work anymore. Certainly economically, it doesn't work. And so the trade-off I think we're going to have is that there will be some buildings which may block some views, If that is the main consideration, it's unfortunate, but I think that's the price you need to pay in order to have a more vibrant town. And I think what we're seeing is a compromise, that we're still maintaining a smaller interior to the town, but we're allowing larger development on the outside, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. And so I'm not able to support this either.
So, like my fellow commissioners, I thank the subcommittee, that the work is just incredible. I'm just to read through and think about all these different items. And I would actually encourage you in March to apply to the PTC because we will probably have an opening or two. And this is the kind of work that we do every project that comes forward. And I think that I was reflecting on the Loyola Corners, one of the projects that came before us, and we had this exact same issue. Okay, this thing is up to code, but we can't support it because it doesn't meet other things that we feel that we want to do, views, things of architectural nature. And so I don't want to comment too much on that project, but my point is that that's what this commission is about, is the members of the public to sit and look at projects to say, does this support what the community wants? And like my fellow commissioners, to put a moratorium or to drop the height limit down, I'd like to hear what the economic feasibility comes back, the study from the downtown area, and let that be the driving force as to what makes sense for the downtown to survive. If it's more feet on the street and we can do it in a 30-foot building, great. But if it's more feet on the street and they need to make it 40 feet, I hate to say you can't do it because I think it's the economic vitality of downtown that we want to look at and make sure that there's enough people that are in the downtown specific area so that they can support the businesses there. And then what we have now is a lot of people that are driving to downtown, and that makes it a tough way of making a business for the business owners that I've talked to, because they're dependent on the weather and lots of other factors that if people are there present, it's easier for them to walk into. So it's hard for me to support this without seeing that there's some delay or what the economic impact of that it would be. So do you want a motion, or do you want just a motion to recommend to City Council that we are not supportive of item A? 1A? How do you want to refer it?
1A is fine.
1A? Okay. Is there a motion that...
I move that we do not recommend...
Microphone.
I move that we do not recommend the DBC 1A recommendation, which would limit the heights of structures in the CD, R3, and CD district.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second motion.
And is there any more conversation? All those, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries 5-0. The next item we want to consider is item number C, which is the letter C. Design
1C.
1C. But there is another one something, I think, somewhere else. So I don't want to go into that. Anyway, but just that the design, again, we're talking about the CD and CDR3. And just for members of the public that aren't very well versed, we're talking about First Street and the areas that are closer to Edith and San Antonio than Main and State Street. Those are different zones. Do you want to go in the same order?
Oh, lucky me. You're going to have to reverse it, for some of them. I
Okay.
won't do it for the whole night.
All right. How about just the first two?
Okay. So this item is applying a tool that defines a design choice across the board legislatively. And as a design professional, I resist that. It reduces the linear footage to the linear run to have where one would have to make a change, and in doing so it adds in addition defining what the changes of plane may be. And in my experience of sitting on Planning Commission and on the Planning and Transportation Commission and on the Design Review Board, I have to say that I have always felt that the discretionary group discussion has always been sufficient to do this without having to legislate it. So I cannot support this.
I also agree that prescribing specific requirements, it takes away from, the architect's creativity in creating something new and interesting. It's entirely possible to have other ways and means to achieve what we want to achieve, so I would not recommend approval of this one.
I think that one of the reasons our commission, I think we benefit a lot from having architects on the Planning and Transportation Commission for exactly this purpose, because you can explain why, from a professional design point of view, there is a need for greater creativity and flexibility and discretion in design, that simply assigning numbers and percentages will inhibit that good design. So I support what you've said so far, and would further state that I think whatever visioning or continues has to incorporate, this type of commission has to incorporate an architect's view.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I don't even understand where the need for this came from. I really object to trying to legislate design details like this. I think you can have really crummy-looking buildings that have a 50-foot wide limit and terrific-looking buildings that are 75 feet wide. I just don't understand why you would want to do something like this. I think the idea is to have inspiring, appropriate architecture, which I think the design goes through enough reviews by both the PTC and study sessions and eventually the City Council that we can trust both the review process and the architects themselves to do the right thing. I don't think we need to legislate it. I mean, I just don't understand how this is going to make things better, so I can't support this.
And for me, I had very mixed feelings. I wasn't sure. I mean, I really like that in the downtown guidelines it says we need to maintain the village characteristics, and that means not one continuous building that goes from one block to the other, that it's broken up. And I thought about the 400 Main Street project, because we did articulate to the developer that the back of it, you can't leave it one continuous block. And we said, look, you got to do something about it. And so they did. They made the back of it into sections so that it didn't look like one big building. But on the front of it, I don't know if that's 50 feet or 75 feet. I was trying to figure out how far that was, because I think that in that regard, we try to say, look, we want to see different elements to make it functionally look as pleasing as possible. So, I mean, I'm torn yes or no. I could see having the 50 feet. I could see just leaving it the way it is. And I think that, Renee, you brought up a good point, that I think that's what our jobs are, or part of when we look at plans is to say, does this make sense? And to say, we know that the guidelines are to put 50 or to put smaller areas so that it looks like it's one building.
It looks like it's not one building.
Not look like one building, that it looks like they're individual units that have been built.
Does it not look like one that's not?
That it's not that way. So I don't know if making, I mean, this is one I could go either way, but.
Can I mention something?
Sure.
You brought up 400 Main Street. I think that actually is a really excellent example of where that's a 300-foot long building, and it's basically just a giant dormitory. I mean, it could be if that were in the Soviet Union, it would be rectangular, right? And the architect, yeah, you may not like the design, but the architect did a terrific job of breaking it up. When you look at the front, it does not strike you that it's one big monolithic building, which in fact it is.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have examples of how between the review process and the design process, we don't let that kind of stuff happen.
I have an additional comment, which is I think this discussion, this most recent one, actually really typifies what I think is the good thing about the commission that I sit on here, which is that we have discussions where we look to see what the goal is. Someone almost always articulates the goal, and then the rest of us fuss over whether it's being achieved or not, or whether the method by which it's being achieved is one that is aesthetically pleasing, works well with the village concept, whatever. But we do a lot of articulation of goal and then evaluating solutions, and that's why we are not zoning only development by right community. We have a second layer of review, and this is it. And I think this little discussion here even typifies that. So I will move, since we have sort of a consensus here, if not unanimity, I move that the Planning Commission does not support the recommendation of the DBC item 1C, which was to modify 14.44.130 and 14.521110 as described in the report.
I'll second it.
It's a race.
I second.
All right. Any further conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All any opposed? None abstaining. Motion carries. Do you want to bring John back? So what I thought we'd do is for items B, D, and F, maybe we talk about them all together because they're all related to essentially the same things, as I remember. Minimum sidewalks be 6 feet. D is requiring a setback. E is about variation of in guidelines, and F was about the setbacks, et cetera. I don't know if that would make sense to talk, because I know for me there were certain things that I felt play together, like the setbacks and the sidewalks.
I agree.
Okay. Should we try that? So we're going to talk about D, B, D, E, and F. Ernie, you want to? I picked on, since I let Phoebe go first last time.
Okay. So I don't perceive sidewalks, the width of them, as being something that either draws or is repelling people from downtown Los Altos. And when I look at all the over a dozen reasons for satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the downtown, there's just no reference of it. And so I don't think this is necessary. I think it will change the economics significantly of development, which I wonder if that is the intention. And if it really is our goal to have wider sidewalks, then on Main and State Street, we should consider what Palo Alto did on California, which they took it from the street and not from business owners and property owners in our downtown who are sustaining it. And I think, a lot of the discussion is about continuing and preserving what we have, and expanding the sidewalks is not a necessary component of that. If we perceive that what we have is sufficient, we don't need to expand it. So for those reasons, I don't support.
So you're saying for all B, D, E, and F?
So B was the
Only B.
sidewalks. D was the setbacks, which I think has the same effect. And F, I think staff says that these will change the economics of these buildings, which is, shorthand for saying discouraging development. And again, I think that our town has divergent opinions on whether there should be more or less development, and I don't think it's appropriate to change the zoning ordinances to sort of sneak in that agenda.
Ken, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I actually like all of these ideas, but it does concern me, or all of these recommendations rather, but it does concern me that they do have economic impact, and kind of irrespective of what Ronit said, the staff has noted that as well, and I think I don't think we can certainly discuss them, and they're certainly good ideas, but I do have some concerns about trying to incorporate them into zoning changes or regulations before we have some back and forth discussion about them. So I don't know whether that means you support them and send some kind of a message to council that there needs to be further study, or we simply just say we don't support the recommendation. I think I do like the idea of making sure the sidewalk width is there are some places, for example, along First Street where you have to almost be a tightrope walker to get along the sidewalk. And there are other places where First Street has been rebuilt that it's terrific. And some of it was taken out of the street. I don't know that we have enough street in some places to be able to do that. So I just think that it just needs more consideration. I think it's a good idea. These are good ideas, but I think we need to study them more. And I don't know the right way to word that as far as our recommendation to council.
My turn?
Yeah.
For this sidewalk setback, I don't see the width of the sidewalk as big of a problem, honestly. And if it's going to be complicated with all the other utilities and landscape and everything, I don't see it as being a big issue. So I wouldn't recommend item B. On item D, I do agree that it would be nice to reduce the mass and bulk of the third floor, and not have a solid wall going up 3 levels. But I don't think necessarily a setback, a 5-foot setback is the answer. I think there are other ways of reducing the bulk. It could be a reduction in square footage on the third floor, or requiring that there are some upper balconies, or many other ways to achieve that. But I definitely want to see less bulk on the third floor, but not necessarily with a setback. Prescribed setback limitation, because I again think this will reduce creativity, and it would dictate a specific style and design, and not allow for creativity. Then there's the item
F.
Yeah, I think that's it. The item E, I think, is already, the variation in building entrance and that tunnel effect is already addressed, I think, in the guidelines. And so I think the guidelines will cover that. Other comments.
John, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. So I think a number of these ideas are good in concept, but the question is, how do you implement them in ways that actually work? and the devil is ultimately in the detail. So 6-foot wide sidewalks are great, but how do you put it in a town that really already has largely built out its infrastructure? And there are people who are advocating for more outdoor dining, and 6-foot wide sidewalks serve that purpose. But you've got practical reality here. And I think, so I'm sympathetic with the goal to make the community more open, more walkable, more livable. The challenge is, how do you do it? And I think the concern my fellow commissioners have expressed, and I will concur on, is that if you lock it in via zoning, then you really restrict what you can do. And it's the unintended consequences that you always have to watch out for. So with regard to item B, I really, again, good idea, but how do you implement it? I don't think you implement it via zoning. I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. With regard to both D and F, D, E, and F, right?
Yeah.
Again, I think, good ideas, but I'm not convinced that changing the zoning is really going to do it. And, I think it's like a lot of the things that happen at the Planning Commission level. We need more input from the community. And I would say, if there's no other takeaway from the work that this committee has done, is that we as a planning commission, when projects come before us, we need more input. Because we always have the usual suspects who show up to advocate for or against whatever. More community input. You could fire a cannon through this room very often when commercial projects come into town. So having more community input, making us more sensitive and aware of some of the things that we may not be as sensitive and aware of, I think that's a good thing to be doing. And I think because on a case-by-case basis, we can be actually more effective in looking at those things and looking at the trade-offs. So I'm not supportive of those things as presented as zoning changes. As Ken said, I think these are in concept good things, but the actual implementation, I think, has got to be done more on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Phoebe?
So I would like to hark back to something that the committee talked about in the second half, which was improving the transparency and consistency of the process, because I believe that would support the goals that are expressed here, which is to make a more walkable city, to have wider sidewalks, to have articulated buildings, to reduce mass and bulk. If the documentation and the checklists that they're talking about being developed were able to make it clear to development candidates what the city's goals were, then the design professionals who were creating the projects would have the tools without limitation of specific, you must do this, you must make this, to be able to be creative. Because if we say, for example, that the upper level has to be stepped back, if it's in the zoning as must be stepped back 5% or 5 feet or 10 feet, then what you get is in the commercial zone what we have in our residential, which is the world-famous daylight plane creating the wedding cake house. That is the classic what happens when you have a residential zoning where you have a daylight plane that's quite intense. You have a house that zigzags. Well, I don't want to see that happening on commercial. I'd much rather see the kind of articulation that we see on some of the buildings on 3rd Street, where someone actually went about it in a more creative manner, and I wouldn't want that to be limited. So I don't value the economics as a primary reason to not support the recommendation. I support the goal. I don't support this method of doing the goal, because I echo staff's comment that there's a feasibility issue. One thing we might talk about as something that might make it more feasible is if there was a public benefit, that would be a developer incentive to state as the goal, for example, and we can discuss this in another time, if the goal is to have wider sidewalks and we don't want to take on-street parking off, which is what they did in California Avenue in Palo Alto, to get the wider sidewalks. If we can't afford that because paralleling this discussion is the parking issue in town, then maybe the thing to do is to say as a development incentive, we will let you do bigger, wider, whatever, if you give us a wider sidewalk so we can have sidewalk cafes. This is another way of looking at it. The infeasibility is a problem because, as John points out, town is built up, and we talked about this in one of the downtown committees, that we said, let's make them 10 feet wide all the way. And the fact is, we can't do that. It's a taking. So, with that said, I'm looking at B, where I, too, with staff, support the goal of having wider sidewalks, but I don't believe that it's feasible, so I would have trouble supporting anything but a recommendation that says to City Council, I support the goal. Let's see if it can work. When I go to D, I have mentioned that I would definitely not recommend this because I think this is something that has often come up in the design review process on the commission, and we have always looked at mass and bulk and said, what can you do to reduce it? And if it's the upper level, fine. If it's an entire 3-story wing, that's fine with me too. I just don't want to see the Soviet architecture that was referred to by my other commissioner friend. For E, once again, I believe that this is another factor of let's not have Soviet architecture. This is another way of saying the same thing, which is a consistent goal. We have the same goal, articulated buildings, not imposing mass unnecessarily. And on F, same thing, infeasibility. So, in my opinion, we might, in this one, after the chair gives his opinion, we might consider crafting a different kind of motion.
Thank you. And for me, when I looked at these items, what I do agree with is trying to create a more walkable area. But then I thought about First Street and how we've created a more walkable area between Main and State Street, but like with Draggers, we wanted it wider, et cetera, and really it was staff that's saying, well, when the telephone poles go underneath, we'll have this better way, and blah, blah, blah. It was really predicated on what money the city had to drive the development of getting rid of the poles and stuff. And in the complex that was mentioned, 960 San Antonio, one of the things that I'm really amused about is they took the telephone poles, or the power line in, and they dropped it down to the ground, and then they went down to the back of it, and then they went back up. And I thought, well, that's great. Well, now you've got this one little section with 2 poles that drives the power underneath. And I was, like John was mentioning, thinking about, well, how does development go through if they have to take in the power lines just in that one project? Are they going to do this same little cut and paste thing down the street? And I would imagine First Street with telephone pole, or the power lines, and then down, and then not, and the streets wider and stuff. There was really no consistency. So for me, I think that it's really, for the sidewalk portion of it, I look for the city to really drive that and make that happen, not a zoning as far as a project comes in. That First Street is a great example of, they made it happen for that portion that they were working on, and then nobody had to wait till rebuilding came, so there was money to do that. So for item B, really tough for me to support that. Same thing with D and E. I thought about the setbacks. We've always talked about setbacks for the 3rd floor, and we've looked at building per building and looked at what they've done architecturally. And I hate to say, okay, you just have to do it this way. I look at the Packard building and think, it's a beautiful building, and I don't know where it is on the 30 feet, but there is no 3rd floor, luckily. But, if it had a 3rd floor, would we have said, oh, you couldn't do that, you had to push it back? But item F is the one that I like the idea, and I look around downtown, it was really interesting. I just walked down Main Street and looking at the vegetation, and you have a 4-foot sidewalk, and then it goes to the 6-foot sidewalk, and then, the plants are somewhat there, and then they're not there, and I think that it's that incorporation of trying to make it more vegetation friendly. And I agree with Phoebe that I think the goal is there. I just don't know what the right mechanism is to use. But it's to really create a more concrete sensitive, I want to say, so that there's less concrete and more plants in all these areas. Those pictures were great where people are trying to make things grow in areas where they really, it's a challenge. But I see that that's what we want, right? We want that vitality of feeling like there's vegetation around and not just concrete sidewalk and asphalt. And First Street's another great example of that between State and Main, where they put in the fountain and all the other stuff to try to make that flow. And then Passerelle, if they're still here, I mean, I really appreciate the fact they put the overhang over the top of it on their dime so that there was shade out there for everybody. So it really is a group effort. But as far as trying to legislate it, it's hard for me to support it, but I agree with Phoebe. It'd be nice to craft a motion that, we're in support of the goal, but maybe this is not the mechanism to deal with it.
Well, it's interesting because if we look at page 5, right in the middle under F, where the discussion point is staff supports the concept of requiring wide sidewalks, generous landscaping, and ample amenities to enhance the pedestrian experience within the downtown triangle. That is the goal that we all support. I'm not even sure I would say the concept of requiring. Staff supports wide sidewalks, generous landscaping, and so do I, and so do, it sounds like, all of our commissioners. They bring up a second point, which I think is an interesting one that we didn't talk about, which is that there is an urban design concept in our heavily developed areas, not only in our town, but in general urban design, to create a continuous line, a continuous visual line architecturally that supports a certain feeling. And I thought it was very interesting, I think it was Baggy who pointed out, or maybe it was Ken, that if you have more intensive development around the perimeter, the response, the architectural response of the building to the edge of the sidewalk and to the street can be and probably should be different than a less intensive development that we have in our historic downtown core. And therefore, I'm not sure. I think the reason that I am resisting, and maybe other commissioners are well, in making it a zoning requirement is we shift the town's response to building from being a discretionary process where each building is evaluated in context on its merits at the time that it's being built, because our tastes and general development scale changes over time, to one that's making it more designed by zoning right. And that was something that we have always, as a policy, been told. The city policy is not to have development by right, by the zoning rules, but actually is discretionary, and that has always been policy. And so this, I think, is something that's important for City Council to consider, is that if they're changing the policy of the town, which they as the elected body could do, then the policy should be that we are removing discretion from our review process and turning it into a zoning by right town. And there are towns that are like that all over the country, so it's a policy decision. So having had my high horse, I would like to say that I move that the commission state that they support the DBC concept of wanting wide sidewalks, generous landscaping, and ample amenities, and building articulation, but that we are unable to support the recommendations as written for a variety of reasons: economic feasibility, physical feasibility, practical feasibility, and leave it at that.
So I would like to second that, but I'd like to second that, but make a friendly amendment.
Yeah.
That we ask the council to maybe think about development incentives that would drive those goals.
That's a good thought. Before I see if I will accept that friendly amendment, staff Is that something that would have to be, what would be the mechanism for that? Are development incentives defined?
Right now, there are development incentives related to implementing the downtown design plan. So you could define other public benefits that could be eligible for development incentives.
And so
as
this
part of
is
the
not
code.
one of them at this moment, is the question.
The downtown design plan has a wide range of things that it seeks. There are aspects of this that could be rolled into a public benefit that could be eligible for a development incentive. But as part of this, you could get more specific in what is eligible for a development incentive.
Okay. So I will accept that amendment.
And there was a second, so any further conversation? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? And nobody abstaining, so motion carries 6-0. What I'd like to do is, let's do G through N, and then after that, maybe take a 5-minute break, since we're getting on to the 9 o'clock hour.
E, F, G.
They're all about height exceptions, definitions, and tower elements. Pages 5 and 6. Anybody want to start? Well, you started twice with Bibi. Do you want me to start with Ken, maybe?
Well, we could all take turns.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, all right, Ken.
I think all of these are pretty much covered in what we do now. The 8-foot limit certainly is. And I think we, as a matter of policy, I think we do things like, for example, in J, discourage the use of such features if they have the height of increasing the perceived height of mass and bulk. And we don't encourage towers, for example. I can certainly support it. I mean, I think we kind of already do it anyway, but I don't have any problem supporting it.
Okay. Finish out, Ronit?
Just to be clear, we're talking about G, H, I, J, K.
L and M
Three.
and
Up
N.
to N.
All the way to N. Because they're all about the height exceptions, definitions, and tower elements.
For example, on M, not to interrupt Ronit, but
Go ahead.
I think that's a great idea. I think they should, all the exceptions should be called out. I mean, that's a great idea. So I think they can be. I think we should support this as a recommendation. How it's exactly implemented is a different question, but I think these are all good ideas.
So I'm reading those same as discouraging tower elements, which I think, Ken, you said that's what we do, but I think, in fact, the design guidelines actually are suggesting the opposite, encouraging.
You know, do you remember the original Adobe clinic? It had a tower that was an architectural feature. I was very sad when that building got torn down. I remember when it came through, I was on the design review committee, subcommittee of the old Planning Commission, and it had charm and character. And even though it stuck up, it was kind of nice. And so, if Ronit's asking, does the current downtown design plan encourage towers? I think it encourages unique elements, not towers for the sake of making things tall. But if it adds some character to it, I think that's the piece that the plan suggests.
I guess my point was I don't think we should encourage towers and spires and so forth.
What if you're a church?
But if we don't have many downtown, but if it adds to the architectural integrity and the charm of the building, I think that's a design consideration when the building gets reviewed.
So it shouldn't be prohibited.
Right, and I don't know that that this is suggesting that they be prohibited.
I think it is, because if you move it to if you take it to
Discouraging
the height limitations only applying to flagpoles, radio, TV antennas, and transmission towers, then per force, you are saying that it is prohibited, not that it's just
Saying
discouraged.
remove all references that are positive in our code to these elements, tower, or images even. Unless, maybe you could shed light, Zach.
If I could just interject to clarify, what this would effectively do is the code does allow for tower elements to go up to 15 feet above the height limit, and what this is seeking to do is reduce that height limit down to 8 feet. And within the downtown design plan, there is discussion of towers in appropriate places, often related to entry points to downtown, to highlight a gateway.
But that wouldn't be impacted by making a change.
Well, maximum height would be reduced.
Yeah, tower element height would be reduced from up to 15 feet above the height limit to only 8 feet above.
So the question is, does the 7 feet matter, right?
Essentially, yes.
Right. And does staff have an opinion?
I mean, the basis is in the downtown design plan, which was adopted back in the early 90s. And that's really how the downtown design guidelines were developed to support the downtown design plan. So it would be appropriate if this was to move forward to go back and reevaluate the downtown design plan to de-emphasize those discussion points, to appropriately then kind of backtrack and change the focus if that's the commission's goal.
If the city council so moves.
So in my mind, this is sort of like
Do you have your mic on?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just far away.
You know, I think that the way H references it is it says that you can include it if it serves an aesthetic, screening, or green purpose. And to take those components out, even if they serve an aesthetic, screening, or green purpose, I think is not necessary. I think towers probably in '92 were more popular than they are now, but I think that our commission, if we see something that is awful or doesn't serve these purposes,
No, we don't do awful. We don't do ugly. That is not consistent with the design plan for the downtown.
Right. I think that that there is a mechanism for not encouraging that those features in a unattractive manner. But I do like the idea. I think the architects on this commission have talked about not sort of prescribing elements or details. But allowing unique elements and creativity and discretion to sort of dominate. So I don't know that the way it's worded now says you should put a tower, chimney, spire, but that if it has aesthetic purposes, it's okay. I don't see a need to change all references, delete all references to those elements.
Phoebe, do you want to?
Well, the only point that I'd like to come back to is what John said, which is we're talking about 7 feet, really. Because if you leave all the references in it, the recommendation was already making the assumption that the heights would be limited to 30 or 35 feet, and then the tower would be 8 feet above that. But if council decides not to take that recommendation and keeps the height at 45 feet, or even reduces it to 40 as some part of a compromise, a political compromise, then maybe 15 feet is too high above that. Maybe 8 feet is a better limit, as the concept of not wanting something to be so tall. Because if it's 45 feet and there's 15 feet above that,
60 feet.
Whoa. I think that would not go through unscathed in review, I should point out. But that would be a zoning by right limit.
But let me ask you, what if that height was created because they put solar panels on the entirety of the roof? which is what is referenced here.
Mhm.
So you could then camouflage that with these elements.
Not at 15 feet. I mean, you don't need 15 feet to camouflage solar panels.
Yeah.
And our experience with the building that's at the corner of First and State is they've sort of violated the machinery rule anyway, and you still can't see the solar panels. You have to get up on the second floor of the Safeway and look directly at the building, and then you can sort of see them. You can't see them anyway, so I don't think you need a 15-foot spire to hide solar panels. I mean,
So with that said, my comments, I pretty much follow what Ken and Ronit said, with the exception that I can actually surprisingly support the 8-foot limit for features and elements above whatever the height is, because I did not support the lowering of the height in general. Other than that, I concur with what my previous commission comments had been.
Okay, John?
Okay, so I would agree with what Phoebe has said as well. I would make a comment that, unfortunately what happens sometimes, and we have seen it several times in our downtown, where people think that putting a tower or no spires, but a tower element will compensate for bad design. And let me state right here and now, it doesn't. If it's bad design, a tower doesn't help it. But conceptually, I'm not against a tower. I think restricting it to 8 feet above is probably not a bad idea. I mean, I agree with Phoebe. It probably wouldn't get through design review, but if that's the case, then why have 15 feet? Seems silly.
And I also agree on all that I've been hearing, and I do not want to see a 15-foot tower above a 45-foot building, so I agree with the 8-foot limit on that as well.
And for me, I was in support of all this. I mean, I thought that, it seemed like they were cleaning up things and trying to make it clear so that what we wanted, the developer knew already ahead of time. The towers wouldn't be 8 feet, and we don't want to see flagpoles and those elements. So I was okay with most of what was written here.
So I move that we recommend to City Council that DBC recommendations, G through N as in Nancy, are supported by the commission.
I'll second it.
Any further conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So I'm in favor of G, I, J, 3, and L. And I think that H and K are not necessary unless you want to discourage all towers, regardless of height.
So do you want that as two separate motions since we have one dissent, or do you want to?
Well, she doesn't support it.
I mean, just I don't know how you.
Well, there was a motion and there was a vote.
So the vote is for elements G, I, J, because you said to piecemeal list L, M, and N was we all said yes. What I'm hearing is items H and K are not.
You have unanimous support on 5 of the 7, so
Right.
why wouldn't you separate it out so that you can reflect that and then just show a dissenting opinion on 2 pretty minor ones?
So that motion would be withdrawn?
Yes. I'll try again. So I move that we, as a commission, support DBC's recommendations G, I, J, L, M, and N unanimously. And there will be a separate motion for the 2 that are not there.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, and now we'll vote again. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion. Any abstaining? Motion carries.
Next motion.
Next motion for I, H, and K.
H, I, and K.
No, H and K, right?
H and
Okay.
H and K. So, I move that commission does not support DBC recommendations H and K as written because they don't need to be moved in the zoning code. For the reasons that Commissioner Bowden pointed out.
I'll second that.
All right. So all those, any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I'm going to oppose it because I think that cleaning up the code would help.
That's a slippery slope.
You have to say all those opposed.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye. And then you want to state why?
Yeah, I think we do need to include it as a recommendation.
So items,
I wanted to discourage
So it's a-
towers and cupolas,
Yeah.
and I think the 8-foot limit's a good one.
well, it's not, it's the towers and cupola.
Right.
So the motion is a 4-2 vote with 2 people saying that they feel that we should have supported it. You guys got
the
this?
second on that.
John?
Thank you.
I think Ronit was the second on that latest motion.
On the second one, it was.
On the second one? Oh, I'm sorry. John was the first, yeah.
It was the second.
So it's a little after 9. Do you want to take like a 5-minute break?
Why don't we come back at 9:15? That's an even number.
I can't see that far. My
9:15.
glasses on.
9:15.
Yeah, you want to come back? Okay, so we'll start this meeting again at 9:15. That's 8 minutes from now.
Good job.
Thanks. Anyway. They have 30 seconds. I'm going by that clock. What time? They have 30 seconds. So I'd like to remind everybody you have about 25 seconds before the commission's going to get back in session. You want to bang? You have about like 20, 15 seconds. Just want to get everybody settled down so we can keep it moving. You know how council meetings go. All right, you guys ready? It is 9:15 for those people at home. If I could have the commission's attention. It's 9:15. We're going to go back in session. I don't know what else we need to do. And we're going to do item number O, the lighting and shadow analysis. Item number O. Letter O, I'm sorry. Mahi, do you want to start?
Sure. This one, I think it's a great idea to have that light shadow modeling, but as an earlier architect comment, brought it up. This is so easy to do for architects with their programs nowadays, and all you need is a Google Earth, and you put your model in there, and it works. I'm an architect, so I know. I don't think you need. I do appreciate what the experts do, but for a 2 to 3 story building, I think that might not be necessary, that it could be done by the architect that's presenting. And if we are going to address another item later on, if we do have an architect in staff or on the commission that can evaluate that might be all that we need.
Okay. John?
So I'll echo the comment that I made during the study session, which is, while I think that the idea of a shadow study is interesting, and interesting is a good word, the question that I have as a commissioner is, what do I do about it? When somebody gives me the shadow study that says it's going to cast a shadow, is that the basis for approving the building, not approving the building? Is it strictly informational, so that it's simply we're doing the shadow study so everybody knows the shadow that's being cast? From an informational point of view, sure, if it's easy to do, great information, but if I'm supposed to incorporate that into my decision because it's casting a shadow, that's a can of worms. At what point...
It almost casts a shadow over the whole thing.
It casts a shadow. It casts a doubt over the whole thing. So therein lies my conflict. What do I do with it? What kind of basis is it for me individually or as a commission in terms of the decision-making process? And when we go to an applicant, what do we say to the applicant? You can only have 50% shadow. It can be only 25% part of the day or night. And, are we measuring it January 1st? Are we measuring it June 15th? Or when's the...
June 21st.
June 22nd. So I'm conflicted here because I don't know what I do about it, and I'm concerned if we start getting it and make decisions without some firm basis or consistent basis, we're going to be doing something that we don't want to do as a community, which is to make arbitrary decisions on a project. So I'd be welcome to hear from my other commissioners on this one.
All right, Phoebe?
Well, I would like to quote Zach on page 7, where he says, "It is also important to identify the problem that a shade and shadow analysis would address." So the question is, yeah, we can have a lot of information, but are we going to say to someone, you happen to be in a place where, because your street is oriented east-west, you cast a shadow, so you can't build on your property? That is not one of the bases of zoning. Now, if you were in a place where the shadow I don't know what I would even, even if you were to say it shades someone else's building, so what? I mean, we're not going to move the sun. So
The sun moves, Phoebe.
but we're not going to move the building. The sun moves, pardon me. I mean, I looked at this and I said, this is educational, this is informative, but in the end, it's useless relative to making decisions about the building. Are we going to say that because you cast a shadow, your building needs to be 15 feet shorter than someone else who's in the same zone and on a perpendicular street and therefore is not casting shadows? I don't see that as good policy. I don't see that as good zoning. So I could not support this particular one.
Okay, Renee?
Are we doing more than one, or doing one at a
Just
time?
one. Well, this one is just one, because
Just-
this is the only one that dealt with shadows.
Okay.
You need your mic on.
A lot of times when we do this, we ask for the 3D modeling is because we want to see how it looks in context, because we want to avoid what we perceive as, something that would be undesirable. So it's, I think, what would be the purpose? I think it would, too often, shadows would, if identified and highlighted, would be perceived as as being a bad thing and something to be discouraged, whereas it's just a reality. And what day, any developer brings a project is going to show the shadowing on the most advantageous day that they can conceive of. And what are we really getting? We're getting 1 out of 365, images. So I just, I don't perceive it as a negative, so I don't see a need to gather that information.
Ken?
Well, I have to say I disagree with the two commissioners who don't like this. I think, actually, it's an interesting idea. I think it is one piece of information that you can use to determine whether or not a building is appropriate. It's like the sight lines that we use when we were evaluating someone adding a second story to their house. Are they going to be looking into somebody else's backyard or someone else's bathroom window? I think the shadow can affect other people. For example, if a building has a lot of solar panels and it turns out for a good portion of the year, it's not just one day, by the way, Ronit. The program can go all 365 days. It's not going to be June 15th or January 1st. It's an interesting piece of information that we have available to us. It's just like the photorealistic simulations that we now require for all buildings. I think that those are more important. This isn't necessarily something that will be a yes or no as far as a building design, but it may modify the design. You might say that 15-foot spire that you want on the top of your building is inappropriate because it casts a shadow for most of the year on your neighbor's solar panels. So I think it's a great idea. I don't think it hurts, and I think it's something that we should include.
So for me, this is an area where I thought that it really wasn't a necessary thing. I thought about when we looked at like State and First Street, and we talked about the height and looked at where, I think that every building that comes in front of us, we kind of look at this on our own, and that for the city to spend money to have somebody there, or I don't know how you'd fund it, I just felt, how much benefit is there from the public to use funds to do that?
I'm sorry. The idea of having a special consultant who does the shadow analysis, I think, is inappropriate. The fact is, the architect can do it by pushing a button.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because that's what I looked at.
Yeah, I agree.
And I agree that we've done that before when we've looked at buildings, and we've said, oh, this is a north side facing building, and the sun's going to come this way, and I mentioned first in San Antonio because we said, look, you're going to get full sun the whole day on the First Street side. You better think about what that's going to do, not only to behind you, but also what's the front, and we talked about it a lot, and how to make that as shade oriented so that there was shade.
Because we're hot in the summer here.
Exactly.
Having a shady part of the street to walk on when it's 90 degrees for 5 days in a row isn't a bad thing. I have a question for Jolie, though. Isn't there some California regulation dealing with solar access relative to trees?
Yeah, there is some. I thought you were going to ask about that. Yeah, there is something, I think it's in the civil code, and it's about trees and trees blocking access to solar panels, and it's been amended, but I'd have to look into it. But
I'm curious if this might be something that would, if it's not coming through, it might come up in other ways. I mean, is this going to be a state mandate where the state says, no, you can't put up a building because these people have solar panels, you're not allowed to do it? That's one thing I'm thinking about.
Well, that's the question. I mean, there's a big difference between trees versus a building, right? And
trees grow, buildings don't.
Right.
So,
So right now, I believe the regulations, and maybe staff can comment on it, apply to putting up foliage, landscape that blocks solar panels.
When the solar panels
is already in existence.
Precede them. So if there was a study and the building who was being shaded already had solar panels, how would that be dealt with administratively? What would staff say if that came in?
I don't know.
Staff would be silent.
Staff is silent. Staff would turn to the council and say, what do you want to do here? I mean,
is that what you guys would do?
Well, we would research the state regulations.
Good answer.
to trees.
To trees.
Right.
Yeah.
Trees, because of the residential
component
of people.
But so many buildings now are starting to have solar panels on them.
And it's something we want to
downtown.
encourage as well.
So this is oh, go ahead.
I think you'd have to, I mean, we'd definitely have to research it, but solar panels on the roof, then another big building, it's only going to block
Right.
the access for a certain amount of time, and I think you'd have to look at, is it going to, deplete all their solar access or just part of it?
But Jolie, that's exactly what this is about. You do an analysis to see which part of the year, for how much of the year, when it will. If it's going to block it during the winter, it's going to be bad solar energy during the winter anyway. It's the summer when we generate most of the solar power.
I mean, if the Pancake House had solar panels on it and the first and San Antonio building went up, which is going up, did anybody think about, well, if they have solar panels there, that building is probably going to shade them, therefore they're not going to get as much production.
More expensive.
But do we really want urban planning and design to be?
No, my point, I'm just curious, would staff then look, I mean, are you guys aware that those elements need to be looked at?
They are now.
My understanding is that it ultimately is a civil matter. So if you have solar panels on your roof and your neighbor plants a tree after, so if you've got a redwood and then your neighbor puts up solar, they can't come and say cut down the redwood. But if you plant a tree after the panels go up, there could be a civil claim made there. But the city, to my understanding, wouldn't get in the middle of that.
But we're talking about a building.
All we're talking about is just doing an analysis in the process of looking at the design of the building. That's all we're talking about.
Would you want to require it or make it something that you could ask for the way we sometimes ask for additional information?
Right, this makes it a requirement.
But my question is, if you make it required and we get the information, then how do we evaluate? If the building if it casts a shadow 50% of the time, do we say to the applicant, no, it can't?
Depends on what the shadow does, John.
How is a building not going to cast a shadow 100% of the time?
Well,
No, but the question is, an effect what?
An effect what?
Exactly. And you won't know unless you do an analysis. All this is saying is do the analysis.
But is it something that should be required? Or is it something staff could say?
We heard that it's a button push, right? This is not, we're not asking for a 6-month detailed analysis by 30 people. This is a button push. It's a piece of data, and it may or may not affect the approval of the building. But it's a worthwhile piece of data to have.
So there's two pieces.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
One is, it says here, as Bahi pointed out, it says consult a specialist. I don't think you need
No,
to consult a
we don't need
specialist.
to do that.
Okay.
The next, go ahead.
Then the second part is, and should it be required of all applications? Or is it something that could be
It's not onerous.
requested? And
It's not onerous.
that's a point for discussion.
Yeah.
And what is the threshold for the shadow that we say
John,
this is the
we're
eyes
not
of the
addressing
beholder?
that. We're not addressing that in this requirement.
But what I saw was three elements. There's the consultant, which we've all said we're not in favor of. There's identifying the tools that develop the process, and then there's the creative process to evaluate it. So to me, there's three pieces to this.
We haven't talked about that. That's what John's talking about.
Right, and so, for staff, I don't know whether can we break this up to like O.1, O.2, O.3?
Hey, keep in mind, this is just a recommendation, and then ultimately, whatever recommendation council makes, staff would then do a much more detailed evaluation and come back with recommendations. So you could maybe make a recommendation with specific points to it, or maybe craft an alternative recommendation to that that's on the paper before you.
I mean, because for me, I support the idea of looking at buildings and looking at the effect of the shadow, but I don't know if we need to legislate it versus just being aware of it. Like I just mentioned, like if a building has solar panels or a building, is going to be dramatically impacted, I don't know how to. We need to look at it and make that it's a case by case basis.
Yeah, but how will we know if we don't have a simple analysis done? How will we know? You're saying it would be good to know in case something bad happens. And I want to know how are we going to know if we don't ask them to do it?
But what if it's
I don't.
But if it's
part of my
east-west
analysis.
versus north-south, some of it's intuitive because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So
Usually.
you know you're not going to get certain buildings will never have an impact. So I think
And
that's
some always will.
And so the question is, do we leave this to staff and say this is a tool, and staff can say to the applicant, you happen to be in a situation where your building is going to probably cast shadows. Let's see what they look like. That's within their purview. They could ask it now. It doesn't have to be in the code, does it? I mean, when you ask for 3D renderings, that doesn't say, it's not in our zoning code that says that.
What we ask for needs to be based in our regulations, so we don't regulate this type of thing now. There's nothing in our general plan about it. There's nothing in our zoning, nothing in our design guidelines. So
if we ask for the information,
I mean,
We
then
can't do anything with it.
we'd have to regulate it, right?
Well, I mean, there should be a purpose for it, and that's why the committee's recommendation really is robust. It's asking for it, it's creating standards for it, and it's what do we do with it now that we study it. So, in my mind, it's we could require it as an additional requirement, just like story poles or three-dimensional renderings. That's fine. We can do that. But for me, it's the question of what do we do with that? If we start regulating it, then we need to develop some policies regarding
What do we
how
do with story poles?
Yeah, I mean,
what do we do with story poles?
I mean, that's my.
We inform the community about something which has been a hot button issue, which is, I didn't know it was going to be that big.
Yeah, and this is, I didn't know it was going to cast a shadow all
Oh,
over
how
my-
could you not know it's not going to cast a shadow?
Lots of people don't know, Phoebe. Come on.
This entire commission at the time did not support story poles.
Yes,
Yeah.
and guess what?
So could-
They're required anyway.
So
Go
could-
figure.
So can we? I was going to trade off. Maybe we could say, well, we'd be happy to have a shadow analysis if we can get rid of the story poles.
I'll pass that motion.
Good luck with that.
I'm just.
You're going to get the story poles and the shadow analysis.
Regarding the shadow study, same goes with solar studies. We do often, as architects, do
Right.
solar studies, and with that information, we manipulate or change our design. We put the courtyard where
That's not a bad idea.
where there's going to be more sun. You don't put the courtyard where it's going to have a shadow. So I think it goes line in line with the solar study, and I'm hoping that any architect that takes a job like this will evaluate how the sun is affecting the surrounding. So for that reason, I think it's a good one to look at least. But doesn't have to be an expert doing it. The architects should already use it to come up with a good design.
So, is it? I mean, because I agree with what you just said. Is that I think that the heart of this would be what's the impact of the building to solar.
If you want to,
if that was more the focus, I think that then it's easier to say. Then we can do the evaluations. We can look at it and say what is the impact to solar and the surrounding building solar.
What if that building is going to be putting vastly more solar on
Or if it's a building that's going to be redeveloped, doesn't have solar panels now, but will be in the future. I mean,
right, and then if the building next to it gets built, we can at least know, right? Is that
what I was pointing out wasn't the solar study, like the solar panels, more of how the sun
hits your
moves
building.
around your building.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that, I think it's information that if it's provided by the architect, a solar study can be an extra page, and most of the time, most architects already do it, and they place things accordingly. So it'd be a nice to know that they have evaluated that information.
So it's not really shade; it's really how the sun impacts your building.
Creates the shade. So.
Right. Yeah.
It's not.
So I'll craft something, and then you can all snicker. How's that? So
Really,
you'll love this one. Based on input from staff, the commission cannot support mandating shadow modeling for proposed developments, but can recommend it as a tool that could be requested by staff.
So I'm going to second that.
I feel an amendment coming.
And there's an amendment coming for the purpose of evaluating the solar impact or the light. So you got to say what the purpose is.
Well, I'm not clear on what the purpose is.
Well, I'm not clear on the purpose either. But if we're going to make a recommendation, we ought to at least have in mind what the purpose is. And I would rather it be clear that it's for understanding the
potential for solar panels on other
polar
buildings?
for light and solar panels, as opposed to saying it's to evaluate if somebody's going to cast a shadow.
Well, I didn't want to say that. I just
Well, I
said
know.
do the study because I really think I thought that really was quite clear. Staff said this should be analyzed to determine if shade and shadow is an appropriate tool to use when evaluating downtown development. I can't accept that amendment because what I'm saying is it's a tool. If staff thinks it will be of value, they can recommend to the applicant. But I, in my crafted motion, would not make it a requirement for every development coming through because I personally don't see a reason for doing it.
on one of the earlier iterations. Well, one of the things, I mean, it's you can require it as a tool. Where we're concerned is if we don't have a standard to evaluate, what you do with it.
Right.
We need to be clear in what we're doing. Just story poles are different there to aid in the bulk and mass considerations that we already have on the books. So so for the solar shadow study or something, that's fine to require it.
But
as
what do you
long as
do
we're
with-
clear that we're not going to use it as a basis.
Okay, in that
In
case,
design
I
review.
withdraw my motion, and my current motion is going to be that because there is no basis for evaluating the effect of shadow on buildings, the commission cannot support this recommendation.
And I'll second that.
So I heard Renee second that. Any further conversation? You want to think about it, Ken?
No.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
And any abstaining? So the motion carries 5-1, and it's being denied because?
Because I'm really mad that you guys don't. No.
I just so that this council knows, the minutes reflect
because I think it's an extremely easy thing to do. I think it's a valuable piece of information, and I think it's just one more means of determining whether or not a building design is appropriate for the site and the orientation and so forth, size of the building. So I think because it's easy to do, we don't need a specialist. It's something that architects do anyway. I think that it's well worth doing, and so I do support this recommendation.
Okay.
Mike?
Yeah.
Jolie? One thing, we mentioned this, we were just talking about it. The planning application has sort of a catch-all and other information as required by the planner. And so we could, and David even said we have looked at shadows and some of that on certain projects. And if it seems to be a problem, and when staff's evaluating the project, they do it on a case-by-case basis. And we do have that in our standard planning application requirements.
Yeah, and actually, the specific example was the impact of the 101st project on the adjacent smaller office at 21st Street. And there was a specific, I don't know if it was ever part of the public record, but I know it was prepared specifically to provide information to that property owner about the extent of shadowing from that building on his property.
Okay.
The tool is there.
But it's on a case-by-case basis, which I think that's what we as the commission are really advocating, that we don't just say everybody's got to do it, but rather where it makes sense, do it, but otherwise not. All right, so moving on to items P, Q, and R, which are all about protect the views.
Do you want to consider those in line with T and U, which have to do with trees? Because I think they are in conflict maybe with each other.
Okay. So we'll talk about P, Q, and R, and T and U. John, do you want to start off?
We're going up to U, is that correct?
No, we're not going to do S.
We're not going to do S.
Right?
Okay, P, Q, and R, and T and S.
T and U.
T and
U.
U, okay. All right, so, again, I think protecting views conceptually is a really nice idea. Beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. So what views are you going to protect? Where are you going to protect them? I think this becomes, again, a wonderful idea, but how do you implement it becomes bordering on the impossible. So from a practical point of view, I find it difficult, if not impossible, to support. With regard to T and U, I think more shrubs and bigger shrubs are a good idea. The point that Phoebe always makes to us is that if you require too large a tree, it takes too long to get acclimated. So I think, making sure we're not asking for something that's going to be a problem would be my only caveat on that. But more greenery, good idea. And yes, it does start to block views. 50% of our views in Los Altos are blocked, not because of buildings, they're blocked because of foliage. Although I guess we could go back to what we really have is a Mediterranean desert climate and have scrub, which I'm not recommending.
Okay. Phoebe, do you want to?
Sure. So I cannot support P, Q, and R for staff's comment very accurately, which is I believe this is similar to an earlier one that we discussed where I believe it's neither feasible nor necessarily desirable. In terms of T and U, I think this is insufficient information writing this, because we've come in the past with the understanding from staff and from landscape professionals that sometimes you start with a smaller tree and you get a bigger one in 5 years than if you start with a bigger one which grows slower. But I think the real trick here is we want good landscaping, and I'm not even sure it's the size of the tree that matters, it's the support. If people are not watering it, if people are not aerating the soil, if people are not taking care of dog spray, we're going to get a bunch of dead little sticks. And so I'm not sure that talking about size makes a big difference. I think it really has to do with support. And I noted in the report that someone has done a study about what the microclimates are, the passerelle. No, someone talked about, yes, about having done a study about the microclimates of what you can grow in the stupid little planters that people are trying to get in. And that would be terrific, because that's what we need. I don't believe legislating the size is the answer. I think the problem is the landscaping that's going in isn't looking lush and full, except in those projects where people are supporting it massively. The Packard Building, Abby's Hotel, people who are putting time, money, and water into it, and a lot of care are getting much better results. And we can't zone that, unfortunately. So I can't support T&U for the same reason. I think staff's comments were totally accurate, that spacing should be based on the tree species for sure, and also the street dimension to a certain extent. And then minimum height, I don't think that's the right answer, so I cannot support any of those.
Okay. Renee, do you want to?
So I agree. I can't support PQ&R. I don't think I think staff covered all the reasons why, and so did you. And then in terms of the trees, I would like to see, and I think some of the next recommendations go towards us to have higher standards for landscaping. And the example I can think of is when those two projects at San Antonio, right at El Camino. There's one on the north side, the Stanford
Medical
Building, which just did a lovely job, generous landscaping that they took part of the sidewalk. They just did a really good job. And then we had that project that came across the street, and they were putting in nothing. And we said, well, do more of that. And we had to really kind of force it. And I think that we should encourage and codify more generous and quality landscaping. In terms of the trees, I actually thought now we have a use for the story poles. We should put story poles 25 foot high every 15 feet in our downtown and then tell people it's going to go out to 25 feet canopies and see how people feel about the idea of, this is overkill in my mind, especially a 25 foot canopy on a sidewalk that is less than the diameter, 12 feet. You're going to have the trees are going into the buildings, right? So I like the idea of more shade on our streets. I want to see more trees. I love the look and feel when you're walking downtown on the evening and the trees are lit up. I think it's beautiful. It's great during the day too. I want to see that. I think a professional landscaper could probably refine this recommendation to something that I could support, but the size and the quantity and the volume seems too intense. But I like it in principle.
Ken?
So I pretty much in agreement with Ronit. I think all of these I think are well-intentioned, but I don't see protecting the view as I just don't see how that's going to be done. People have to, I agree on what view needs to be protected and what's a view and what isn't a view, and I don't see how that's going to be done. So the PQ&R thing, I don't think I can support. The trees, I think it's a great idea. I love the trees too. We do have a huge number of trees downtown, and I think we need to continue with that whenever we do a new building and a new development. And it is true that some developers, for example, the Stanford Medical Building, they did a terrific job, and I also agree that the building that was proposed across the street, they didn't quite get it until we pointed it out to them. But this may be overkill. The 25-foot canopy on a street tree, I think, is maybe more than we can handle. And by the way, as John pointed out, if we start having 25-foot canopies, we'll ruin all the views anyway. So it's kind of
Not if we put in little trees.
what? No, not with 25-foot canopies. So I don't know exactly the right way to support this. I mean, it's a good idea. It's important, but I don't know what to do about it. Phoebe will craft a motion.
Phoebe.
But my turn? Buddy has to talk, and so does Mike.
I agree with PQ&R. I don't I'm not sure how we can protect views. Again, it's a touchy subject. Everybody has a different preference, so which one are you going to follow? And then on the trees, same thing. I think what I agree with staff on maintaining the current practice of evaluating tree spacing based on the species and the location. That's the right way to go. You have to do it case by case for a specific species. So there can't be a general requirement.
Okay. For me, PQ&R, I'm also opposed to it. I think that in the residential neighborhoods, you see the hills, you see them all around, it's great, and to me, you're living there, but in a downtown area, most people aren't looking at the view, they're looking at the stores, and we want them to look at the stores. I mean, it's part of encouraging it, and if you're next to a building, it got to be really hard as to where, I think when we talk in the study session, you can't build on the north, south, west, or south side because that's where the hills are, but if you're on the other side, you can because nobody's going to look at it. It seems to be a little harsh. The trees, I think a good, for me, was the building we talked about at our last meeting on Miramani, which was, okay, they were going to put crepe myrtles in, and my comment was, well, can you put Chinese pistache in? And the guy said, well, in the parking lot, that's great because you've got a lot of space around. We can do that. But the crepe myrtle actually next to the building is the right thing to put because the Chinese pistache will go into the building and we're going to end up chopping it and we don't have enough room to let it grow. And so I kind of look at that. I mean, I like the idea here, and maybe it's to get a landscaper to come back and have council. I think there should be something about how often the trees are spaced so that the building that we talked that was across from 960 North San Antonio, where they didn't have any trees, and we had to say, no, you got to put something in there. And it seems like we're always fighting this, which is what's the frequency of the trees should they be so that they create a canopy that is walkable? And I don't know what the answer is.
But I
don't think this is. I'd like to see somebody with a lot more expertise talk about this. What makes sense?
So maybe we should be talking about what the result is that we want, instead of being prescriptive about exactly what somebody does, which we talk about the goal being to create a canopy, to create a uniform,
walkable
lush landscape, and that way, presumably, what happens is you get the right shrubbery and the right foliage for the right location and the right size. But you talk about what we want is the end result.
Right.
I don't know if that helps. Maybe
Steph,
craft your motion.
Steph, when you get an application, you get preliminary landscape plans, what's your resource for determining if it's going to fly? They're giving you a series of species, and you're not trained as an arborist. How do you get your information to let you evaluate before it comes to us whether the landscape is meeting the criteria of lush, elegant, high-quality pedestrian experience?
Well, we do a number of things. Some of our documents have streetscape plans with them, and so we look at what those are trying to achieve. Sometimes it's calling out a certain species or a certain area. For example, in the downtown design plan along Foothill, it talks about mitigating building views from the expressway with landscaping, but also providing strategic openings so we still see downtown. So we look at these qualitative things and the standards, and then we look at the plans and are we achieving that? We also research the actual species. We use the Sunset Garden books and other resources to look at the habit of the trees. And we also consult with the city arborist on occasion for street trees in particular. What's the pattern, the spacing, the applicability? And we also look at the performance aspects. Certain trees don't do well in parking lots, others do well. We look at the screening some are too tall or out of context, and so we look for something that might be the right fit given the context. I mean, there's a lot to it. And that's what we do.
Okay, well, thank you. Because you're not horticulturists. I mean, you're doing it, you're learning, or I'm hoping that there's a historic memory where you can say, well, the last time someone planted this, it was a total bust. Let's not do that one again. But we get the landscape design professionals come in and they have their plant list and they say, I'm recommending this because we can't put a big tree next to the building because we'll have half a tree. As soon as it grows up, we're going to have to prune it out. So I'll buy that one. Okay, so we're looking in this one.
Do we want to do P through R as one thing? I heard a lot of support pretty much.
Well, what I heard was P, Q, and R, there seemed to be unanimity. So I thought I might make I move that council be aware that the commission supports DBC cannot support DBC recommendations to protect the views P, Q, and R because of supporting staff's comment that protecting views may not be feasible nor desirable nor practical in this situation.
Second that.
Okay, any further all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? So 6-0.
Okay, so.
And then T and U.
Yeah. I move that the commission recommend to City Council that the goals of having street trees providing canopy and being planted frequently and being planted of appropriate species be encouraged with all development applicants, but that commission does not support the specific recommendations based on staff's noting that further analysis should be made to determine appropriate choices of both species and height and spacing.
Second.
Any further conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. So now we're looking at items number S.
Letter S.
Letters S, V, W, X, Y. And do you want to do Z, or do you want to? Z, and the recommendation is AA. It's all landscaping. So maybe we talk about all those and see.
So V through
AA, but we already.
Okay.
And S. S, and then V through AA. Do you want to start, Phoebe?
Actually, can Ronit start on this
Sure.
one? I want to
Sure.
go through this. I have notes
Okay.
on this I wrote notes to myself early, and I'm trying to reorient
So let's
myself.
start easy. Enforce the maintenance of landscaping. In my mind, that is a priority. Yes, I agree with that. For the others, I think, again, it's overly prescriptive, but the intention I am supportive of. And to define abundant, substantial, those people under those words have definitions. So I don't think we need to define them, but maybe what they're saying is applicants need to see images of better landscaping. And perhaps, I think that's suggested somewhere else that we didn't, but maybe we can provide examples of desirable looks and get the same result. Because I don't know that in every situation you need to have companion plantings, to hide the tree well. I certainly don't support, increasing landscaping by requiring an increase in the setback. I think that goes back to our previous discussion, and we're not supportive of that. But creating a list of suggested plants these are things that if the city, engaged a landscaper to try to come up with suggestions so that each landscaper that comes before us doesn't, give us their opinions or best suggestions, and maybe there are varying qualities, or the developer has invested different amounts in landscaping in different projects. Like if the town invests in having a landscaper create these suggested plans, I'm supportive of that. The end result I want to see. I just don't know that they go about it the right way.
Ken?
I think as I look through this, something's sort of dawning on me that I really support and am impressed by these ideas. These are all, I think, important ideas, and they're something that we obviously like and want to continue to have in our town. But what bothers me is that these are all too prescriptive, and that word's been used several times, and it's suddenly dawned on me that I keep looking at these and I'm conflicted, because I like the ideas, but defining abundant, substantial, generous, extensive, and inviting, I mean, those are David and Zach's standard words. I mean, every staff report has one or more of those words in them. It sort of reminds me of the strict teacher requiring homework assignments to be exact. It's a little bit too much. I mean, we do, for example, want to enforce the maintenance of landscaping. No question about that. And that's actually a problem when the landscaping isn't taken care of. It just looks horrible. But the rest of it, I mean, these are all great ideas. I just feel they're too prescriptive. So it makes it hard to support them. It's not that it's not that I don't want to support them. It's just that it's not practical.
I also agree with both of the commissioners. I do think I had always imagined there is a landscape architect on staff at the city to review all landscape plans. Not that you guys are not qualified, but I would think that would be a lot easier to have a landscape architect on staff to get help with on every project that goes through the city. I think prescribing specific species and specific requirements limits creativity for the landscape architect, the applicant. And so I would say let them come up with a design and have the city staff review it and approve it. So that would be, again, I'm in agreement with the concept, but the implementation I question.
John?
If I'd known this meeting was going to go this way, I wouldn't have driven my car under the risk of it getting egged. We really appreciate the work you guys have done here. I mean, and I think hopefully the message is that the goals we support. The challenge is to how do you do it in a way that is practical for us and practical for the development professionals to actually spec a project. And I think that's the challenge here. I'm agreeing with my fellow commissioners on this one. Great concept, but if we get overly prescriptive, it really doesn't get us what we want. Yes, we need to do a better job of enforcing the maintenance of landscape, but there really are limits in terms of overly prescribing things, overly defining things. It really. I've been on this commission for 9 years now, and the good developers who want to see a quality project do a really good job, and the developers who don't want to do a quality project do the minimum they can and deliver less than that they promised. And that's unfortunately the reality. And, I can point to the projects in town that we knew even before the first shovel that it wasn't going to be a quality project. And it had to do with the plan, but it had to do with the actual implementation. So being overly prescriptive, unfortunately, doesn't solve the problem. So I'm going to agree with my commissioners on their...
I throw something out. I think that there is somewhere a happy medium between those recommendations, and if you look at our design guidelines, the 2 pages that reference landscape, which are just like embarrassingly blank, which explains why the applications have such disparate treatment. There's another page that has maybe 3 pictures, but I think we can encourage, probably from staff, with the help of a landscaper, to make the direction richer and show better photos. The photos that are in here are, I would not say, and these are this one for First Street District is a picture of a tree in a parking lot. So, we can do better, and we should do better. And just saying no, I'm concerned if we just say no to this, then nothing will change, right? And I want to be moving in a direction. So I'd like to see somehow we craft something that suggests that there needs to be an improvement upon what currently exists that is just shy of being prescriptive as to the quantity, size, character of the landscaping.
So I generally concur, and I specifically concur with Ronit. So I think that if we didn't have this DBC recommendation in front of us, and they simply had come and made a joint study commission, I think we could have crafted a recommendation that said, we, as a goal, support lush, well-maintained landscape on all the new construction that comes into town in our big commercial developments, and even in our residential, but big commercial developments. To that end, companion plantings might be an appropriate response. If we have the maintenance guy who does Lava's planters can give his information, give us that microclimate information. If there's a list of plants or trees that we know do well in certain parts of we have a lot of historic knowledge that somehow isn't codified, and it is exacerbated by the fact that the materials need to be upgraded so that we have projects in town that have superb landscaping. Let's take pictures of those in color and say, here's landscaping, and they're all different. Here are several suggestions of the kind of lushness we're looking for. You don't have to do it with these plants per se, but look at the fact that it's not a lot of chips, and they're growing. And here's a 1-year project, here's a 5-year project. Understand the difference, because we know it's going to be small in the beginning, but we want to see infill. As a sidebar, the most incredibly clever tree well I've ever seen would never be done commercially because it's too expensive, but it was pieces of slate that filled the whole tree well and then marched up like scales up the tree. It protected the tree base from urine scald from dogs. It allowed water to pass between the scales so that the plant continued to be watered. It was incredibly interesting to look at. I don't think that companion plantings will survive dog scald, but I think even if it was river rock, it would help. So I think if the goal is that it be lush and generous and extensive, we can show examples. And so the other thing, I have a note to myself I was reading. So Z, I agree and enforce maintenance landscaping. I want the landscape police. But since we can't have that, I really took to heart staff's discussion, which pointed out that sometimes the challenges are not with the new construction, but they're with the old ones that have slowly gotten more depleted and never been replaced. And then we have to depend on Lava to really go around and say, look, you're bringing down the tone of the downtown. Let's do it together. So landscape police, I'll take that, but it's not going to happen. So The motion that I would craft here is to say that I move that Commission recommend to City Council that the goals of the DBC recommendations VWX, VWY, Z, and AA are supported, but that the actuality of the specific recommendations probably needs more review by staff to support the goals in a better way. And you'll notice that I held out X separately because I'm going to do a separate motion on X.
So I'd like to chime in because I didn't get a chance to speak, that I actually
I'm
agree with
so
everybody
sorry.
else, but I want to keep this meeting
Oh,
going,
I'm
so that's
sorry.
fine. No? No, that's all. I'm just going to, that was all I was going to say. Is there a second for the motion?
Oh, okay.
Let's out.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Second.
Second.
And did you get who seconded that? It was a race.
Doesn't matter.
All right. All those, any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries 6-0. And you were going to do a separate motion for item
Yes. And so.
For S?
For X is in.
Or Z.
Did you do S in the other motion?
I think we did.
Oh, yeah.
I did not think you mentioned it. You said V through,
Oh, I did not.
so S is another item. And
Okay.
before you make a motion, I'd like to say that my thought was, I mean, I like staff's comment, which is, we got something already in place. I was thinking, like, we do get landscape plans, so what's the issue? And that's the certified arborist looking at it. But we kind of look at things that way as well, so I don't know whether it's that I don't know what this is trying to solve, I guess, is what I was trying to figure
I
out.
think Ronit kind of pointed it out,
No.
saying that the guidelines are really sparse. They're not lush, inviting, and
Generous. and
generous,
Yeah, so
substantial.
if that was the case, maybe then this wouldn't be an issue.
I think the real issue is that the guidelines need to be
Updated.
improved.
So, so the motion on S is, I move that in support of DBC recommendation, that the landscape requirements throughout the downtown and perimeter districts be better defined in the documents that are given out to applicants, including lots of visual aids in terms of photographic images of successful plantings.
Is there a
This
second?
is X, right?
This
No,
is
S.
S.
Sam.
Like in Sam.
So that's different than what was recommended by the Downtown Committee.
No, we're asking to improve.
Improvement, right.
The improvement is to help people understand better by
Right,
getting
but
better
not the
documents.
specifics of
But not
S.
the specifics.
Right.
And not to have it reviewed by an arborist,
Right.
because if it's going to be reviewed as a sidebar, it should be reviewed by a landscape design professional.
Right.
Because it's not just trees. It's
Right.
whole
Right.
9 yards, so to speak.
Tom,
We have
the
to
second.
branch out a little.
So there's a second. Is there any conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
And now we're going to X, and I move to
X like an X-ray?
X is an
Right.
X-ray, that we can, that Commission cannot support X because we already dealt with the front setback. And in fact, we do support the goal of getting more lush, generous, abundant plantings. This is not the way to do it.
Second.
Okay. Any further conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries 6-0.
And now,
Are we up to BB now?
I believe we are.
Are you guys keeping track?
Wait a minute, did we do AA?
You guys, did we do a?
Part of
Yes,
First-
okay.
First part, okay.
Got it.
Materials.
Materials.
Anybody want to start? Trevor was neat last time.
I can start.
Sure.
It sounds like, sounds great. I mean, we are trying to add high before quality, meaning we're asking for high quality materials, which I think is a great idea. So I'm supportive of that. Is that the only one?
Well, in C,
BB
but
and CC.
yeah,
Materials.
but, I mean, the comment here is that this has already been done, so.
Yes.
I don't-
Yes, C
I
has
don't-
been done already.
So is there any point in us making a motion? That's why I was confused.
CC's already been accomplished.
Yeah, CC is already part of the current submittal requirements for commercial multifamily.
So do we strike it from?
You can just move over it and if you want, or you can comment on it, but
I'd rather just work on BB and what we, if everybody feels the same way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We need a second on BB?
No, I think we need
Discussion.
discussion, right? Or is everybody?
Well, let's, why don't we do a straw poll? It's getting kind of late. What is the general tenor of the commission relative to having exterior materials, finishes, and colors used to serve to reduce the perceived appearance of height, bulk, and mass, and that are harmonious? So I cannot tell you how many times we have said, maybe they should use different colors to break up the mass.
Right.
So it's not like we're not doing this already, but it wouldn't be a bad thing. And certainly, I always inferred that when they said quality, they weren't looking for bad quality.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna
if
say-
we need to say high quality, go with it.
High quality is a little redundant. Normally, we require terrible quality, but in this instance, we want really high quality.
I want miserable quality.
So with that
that's-
said,
That's fine.
I mean, I think that we're all, how could we
We all
not
like
be support?
it.
Is it mom and apple pie? I mean,
But back to staff, I mean, I don't know how you implement, I mean, that was my
Well,
comment. It's
good idea
This is
that
judgment.
supports existing requirements and design.
Findings. They actually suggest how to implement it.
Yeah.
Modify the required findings.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's okay. It's a good idea.
Okay.
So I move that we support DBC recommendation BB.
I
I mean, we could support CC too, right?
And CC has already been accomplished, so
Right.
we're not going to vote on it.
Okay. CC.
And I heard a second.
I did second.
Any,
Let's vote.
okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? All right, 6-0. Rolling along. We're on 8.1 to 8.3. A.1 to A.13.
Why don't we go through G, like all the rest, which have to do with process and procedure?
Oh, okay.
Let me see if there's anything.
One stands out, can discuss it in particular.
The only one I would comment on is I,
Oh, I didn't see I.
which is on page 14.
Oh, my
Sorry, I
favorite.
stopped at G.
A1, right?
Yeah, I have trouble with it. I mean, staff doesn't support A1. I think
Right.
that's a bad thing.
I think it's a bad thing as well.
I mean, if staff doesn't support it, I usually don't override staff if I can possibly avoid it.
Okay,
So-
so are we,
Is everybody feel, so are we, is the general feeling that A.1 is not something that we're happy about, and everything else all the way up to H, we are?
yes?
Is that,
Hold
That's
on,
my-
hold
my-
on. Yes, up
Yes.
until H, yes.
Yes.
But H, okay, I mean, H is
Already
already,
there.
It's already there.
it's already there. We've
Okay,
already
say
done
that.
H.
Okay. So really, the ones that are, might still be for discussion are I.
well, let me just get to H.
Okay.
Okay,
Do we want
So-
to talk about it, or is that helpful for you guys? Or do we just craft a motion?
I think staff supports it, and we all support it.
Right.
And
So
the
I-
reasons are explained in the discussion,
with the exception of.
Probably sufficient.
A1.
A1,
A1.
except for A1, yes.
right.
So I move that we cannot support DBC recommendation for A1 because staff thinks it's a bad idea.
No, I
No,
would say.
because staff says it's not a regulation, and therefore, it shouldn't be named as a requirement because it's not a code. It's simply recommendations.
Right. I think if we adopted some of these other things, then they would actually be requirements and more prescriptive, but we haven't.
And then,
They're main guidelines.
Okay, so that's, we just, do
that's A1.
you want to just stop there and?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second it.
Ken, second. Any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Then-
Now we're going to talk about A.2, 3, C, D, E, F, G. And Phoebe, you've been on a roll.
Okay, so for, now let's think, for
Through-
A2, 8.2 through 2.G.
Through H, well,
No.
H
No,
has been
H.
implemented already,
Right,
right?
right.
H has been implemented. So through G, I move that Commission supports the recommendations of DBC on the idea that code cleanup is a good thing to do, and staff thinks that they can implement it administratively.
I'll second that.
All those, any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
So you want?
This is 2.I.
comments?
Do we want to talk about this, or do
Oh,
we?
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
John, go ahead.
So, there are two issues here. One is the Design Review Commission and Planning Commission have always been formed under the basis that the goal was to get residential and community input into projects. Using a individual or a panel of design professionals is a change in policy. Number one. Number two, given how commercial projects morph, and they do, between study session to first review to second review, my question is, when do you bring in a design professional? Because the project you're looking at day one is not necessarily the project you look at that finally gets approved. And it still may change even more when it gets to council. There are council fingerprints over lots of projects. Do I think more input is valuable? Yes. Do I think more community input, as in the public, is important? Yes, because we don't get enough of it. Is more input from design professionals, could that be helpful? Probably, but I don't necessarily know when that's the most appropriate to bring that in. So it leaves me saying, what if we get it too early? What if we get it too late? What if it's inconsistent with the community values? I don't know how to reconcile that. Phoebe does, though.
No, I have the same response, which is, if you bring in another layer of review, I agree completely that when I first got on Planning Commission, I said, well, this is crazy. Why isn't everybody up here design professional? And the city manager at that point said to me, no, we don't do that here because we believe that community input is critical to how our town is run, and we don't want only design professionals because sometimes they have pretty wacky ideas. So that's the first thought, and it is a policy, so it's a city council policy that would have to change, because if that's the case, then the Design Review Committee and the Planning and Transportation Commission could be all design professionals. They could be no members of the public, and that would equally meet this goal if the goal is to have more architectural input, more design input. The other thing I will point out is, not as tactfully perhaps as John did with fingerprints, but I have noted when Planning Commission has worked very hard to get a design we felt a really good result, and then has gone to City Council, who then proceeded to redesign it ad hoc with no professional design capability on City Council at all. So adding yet another one that Council will go, well, that's nice, they say they like it, but we don't, seems to me a waste of energy and time and money, so I cannot support this.
Okay, Fine. Do you want to?
I'm the same with this one. I cannot support it because I just think every architect will have a different way of looking at the same project, and it's just going to be costly, time-consuming to get every single professional's opinion. It's not a black and white thing usually. So having more architects on in staff and on planning commission is probably a good idea. Maybe not all, but some. But otherwise, to require a panel, another layer of review doesn't seem to be the right way to go.
I agree. I think maybe the happy The right balance is to ensure and continue to encourage and recruit and select architects on these commissions, not just PTC, but some of the other ones, because, Phoebe and Bahi and Malka before, their input is invaluable. They should, in fact, be on any commission also. I mean, this commission
Design
would have
Review Commission.
truly benefited from having a design professional on it. And any visioning process has to have that too. We can't do, we are at such a disadvantage when we don't have and a balance of design professional opinions. So, I don't think there needs to be a whole separate commission. I think the right balance is when we actually have residents who have this expertise, who sit on this commission and engage and interact with the rest of us. So I don't know what the right number is, but always encourage and recruit more.
Kim?
So I think a couple things. One is having another layer of review, I don't think is either necessary or terribly valuable. I also think this commission has 2 design professionals on it, which I think is plenty. I actually wouldn't want any more.
I'm surrounded.
Because, it would be terrible if there were 7 architects on this. It would be awful. It would. That, they'd all have a different opinion about it, and everyone would want something different. I mean, architecture is, part of it is the art part of architecture, and it's, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so I think it's really important to have experienced people from the community who are basically serving on this commission because they love their community and they think they have something to offer. And it doesn't necessarily matter that they're not design professionals. I mean, I'll mention it because he's not here. Jerry brings a very interesting perspective. Jerry is not an architect and he's not a design professional. He's a builder and a developer. And he brings a really interesting perspective. And sometimes he's for a new development, sometimes he's not. And sometimes he makes really interesting suggestions that none of us would have thought about.
Well, he brings up points that would never have occurred to us.
That's what I mean. He brings up suggestions none of us would ever have thought about. So I think and adding another layer of review and having it be all architects, I think is just, it's not useful. So I can't support it.
Okay. So for me, when I looked at this proposal, I was thinking exactly along the same lines. At one time, there was a planning commission and there was a traffic commission, and the council said that there was not a lot of feedback that was going between them, and they merged the 2 together. And I have to say that by doing that, now the traffic issues are certainly something that is being addressed almost at every project. And I see that the commission that we have, recruitment is really the key. Needs to be addressed, and if the mix isn't right, then we should address that. But I have to say, the mix that we have now, every project we have that have come before this board, we've done a wonderful job because everybody has a different hat. It's not like we're all architects or we're all builders or we're all environmentalists or whatever category you want to put it.
Or cyclists.
Or cyclists. But we look at things and go, this is my perspective from my vantage point, and because we have more of a 360 degree, it helps a lot with projects. And I have to say, with John's point, we've had things start one way, and then by the time they've gone to council, they've looked totally different, and then council, as Phoebe mentioned, all of a sudden decides they want to lop a foot off the top. And I'm thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting.
But the other thing is, I think that what's critical is something else that the DBC said, which is we have a lot of documents. But in fact, there is an overall flavor, there is an overall view about what the town character is, even though we can never define what the village really is. There is this, we have a sense of it, and that has always been the basis of the discussion. So if you had yet another level of architectural review, it still has to be with the same basis, which is it's the village concept, it's understanding what the qualities are that make our town different than other towns that are adjacent. So I think that 7 architects would not have 7 different opinions. What happens, we find, is the ones that are really inappropriate, we spot immediately and there's consensus. And the ones that are really outstandingly good, we also say this. It's the ones that are marginal that often have the most interesting and varied discussion with those characteristics that people bring from their different backgrounds. What the architects, as a separate design review committee, would do would be dealing with the architecture, and I'm not sure that that wouldn't be the worst situation, because as Bahi says, that's when you get into the different architectural opinions, because it's not, if it's not on the clear basis, then you get, I like it this better, I like that better. And so I don't see it as serving a function.
So with that, would you like to craft a motion?
Oh,
You've
sure.
been doing a great job.
I move that the DBC recommendation, letter I, is one that we cannot support because in addition to understanding costs, we feel that it's not of sufficient benefit and, in fact, would make the process more difficult for people to get through and take even more time.
Okay.
And because we believe in community-based review, not totally professional.
Okay.
Second.
John, seconded. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries unanimously. Last order of business is items J through M.
I'd like to take J through L.
J through L, okay. Do you want to have conversation, or you just want to see if we all agree in the same way?
Well, staff thinks it's good ideas that can be implemented administratively. Does anybody disagree with that?
No.
Okay.
Okay, then I move that commission recommend to council that DBC recommendation JK 4 and L, 3 JK and 4L be implemented.
Okay.
Second.
Ronit, second it. Any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
All those
aye, aye, aye.
opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries. Item 5M. John, why don't you lead us off since you wanted it pulled?
So, there's been a lot of talk in this town about a visioning process. And I think understanding what you want is a great idea. But there are a couple of realities. One is, it's not as though this is a community center. Oh, wait a minute, we didn't approve that. It's something that it's up to the individual property owner. And, it's not as though we can tell a property owner, you're going to build a 2-story mixed-use building unless you change zoning, right? And you can change zoning. But, the specifics of what gets built it's the property owner's right within zoning and design review to determine what they build. So I think, recognizing what a visioning process is or can be and its limitations, I think is really critical here. And we have all dealt with specific plans. We've dealt with the Loyola Corners specific plan. We've dealt with the Sherwood Triangle specific plan. There ain't a lot to the specific plans. We know that because we've dealt with it, and sometimes they have good input in terms of what's in there, and sometimes it's ambiguous, and sometimes it's downright conflicting. But my concern is if we support a visioning process, we are endorsing a process to get us to a goal. And I'd like to build community consensus as to what this town is, but I also want to recognize the limitations of a visioning process. It doesn't tell you that you're going to look like Santa Barbara, not that we want to look like Santa Barbara. It doesn't necessarily give you the ability to get exactly what you want because you still have people and property rights in a town. And so, and we also have a schizophrenic town. We want to have all the amenities in this town. We want to keep it, lots of trees and greenery and shrubbery, but we want to have the newest and greatest. So there's an element of schizophrenia in this town. So my question is, if we have a visioning process, is that going to give us a useful outcome from a PTC perspective? And that's the part I'm not sure about. All right?
Well,
would I like to build consensus in this community? Absolutely. But I'm not convinced that we can, or that we will have something specific enough that it will give us and developers the tools to really get what we think we want.
I think a visioning process is a good aspiration to have, as long as it reflects both divergent visions that people have for this town. And if you do it right, you have 42% who think they have this vision and 42% who have that vision. And hopefully they can come together and it doesn't become, you have 6 people with this vision and 4 people with that vision, so that's what the vision is going to be, because it's not that we're schizophrenic. It's not that one person thinks we should do this and we should do that. It's that these people think this way and these people think that way, and we're literally divided down the line. And a 51% margin is not what you should base a vision of a city on. Just you shouldn't.
But the question here, so DBC recommends that they support a visioning process, and they're asking basically whether this commission supports the concept of a visioning process. And John's saying, yeah, but we need to build consensus because, as Ranit says, we have a town that's literally divided 50-50 between keep it just the way it is, small, sleepy little town, and the other half that says build. And we're not going to get, it's going to be like when you go to a wedding and there's the groom's side and there's the bride's side. It's very hard, and I was hoping, and of course it may take long enough, that it will come to pass that the stuff that's been happening since 2010, given another couple of years, and people will look back and say, okay, now we can evaluate it. On a certain level, I feel like it's too soon. There are still too many things in the pipeline, and then we'll see if economic vitality really does come from the changes that came to the zoning code in 2010. And to me, it's too soon to tell, but I don't even know what a visioning process is. I mean, I sat on so many downtown committees. We all know what the goal is. The goal is we want a vibrant, economically successful town that can pay its bills and continue to be fiscally prudent and a fun place to live. How it gets achieved, we're trying. I'm not sure a visioning process is going to give us any different answers than what we've already, we try one thing, if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. So my point on this is I don't know that I could support a recommendation that would support a visioning process, but I take to heart staff's very pithy comment, which is the scope and timing of downtown visioning process is a policy and priority choice that rests with City Council. So I basically would abstain from this. I would punt, basically.
Yeah. Phoebe, I agree exactly with that. I don't think that it's our prerogative to decide whether or not to have a vision. If council decides they want to have a visioning process, they'll do it. I don't think that's, I mean, we're going to have a town that has all one-story buildings, no shadows, lots of trees, and the views will be everywhere.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I agree. I really don't have any comments on that.
I mean, my comment was that we've got this economic vision of what the downtown's supposed to be, and that's already City Council's given to staff to do, and to me, let's do that and see what it looks like, and because that would probably drive a lot of the vision. If the recommendation is to put all hotels in, then the downtown's going to look a lot different than it does now. But not that it will be that way, but it just...
I think you direct a visioning process when you aren't happy with the direction that the city is moving. You don't want us to keep on keeping on. then you say, let's have a visioning process. But if you're going to put people that reflect divergent views, you're going to end up, in my mind, at the end of the visioning process, exactly at the same spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do
So
we want to make a...
I move that Planning Commission leave the concept of downtown visioning process to the priority and policy of City Council.
I will certainly second that.
Yep.
Did you get the second? I think it was John over there. Yeah. Ken started, but John finished. All those in favor? Any more conversation? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries unanimously. I believe that concludes the report. Am I correct? Hearing none.
Other commission business.
Commission reports.
I'd like to thank the committee for taking the time to put this together. It's a lot of work, and I know it's taken a lot of effort to do that, and hope that you're not discouraged by the outcome of some of the things, but
In
that...
fact, might consider thinking about being on
exactly.
the Planning Commission.
As I mentioned earlier, that most of the things that you are concerned about are the things that we talk about all the time, and it's a great opportunity to have a active role into projects.
And we don't care if you're a short, recent resident or a long-term
No,
resident.
as long as you're a Los Altos requirement, and John Maggio can certainly
Maggio, yep.
fill the
Maggio
details.
will
I'd like to
tell you.
get through the rest of the items that are on our agenda. We only have two really quick things. Commissioner reports and comments. I don't know who was supposed to be at the last city council meeting. But I certainly have that information.
Oh, good, and we'll find out.
Is there, by the way, a new
Oh, yes.
assignment?
Should be.
Actually, they
Assignment
removed it
of-
from my sheet.
Thank God he has to go to all of them.
Well, he's
you know
a
who
city
was-
council rep for the
Yes.
next 3 years.
Somebody needs to be assigned.
Do we have the 2016 assignments?
You know what? I think that's what it is. I don't have an assignment for the 2016 calendar. And so the next council meeting is next Tuesday.
To be continued.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, is
Hold on a
anybody?
second, hold on. I want to volunteer, but I want to look at my calendar before I do something stupid.
I've got another meeting.
Okay, so that would be Tuesday, the 12th? Is that correct?
Yes.
I can do that. I will take that
Sold.
one.
Sold. And then, since we're meeting on the 21st, is it possible that we could have a city council assignment?
Oh, boy.
Okay. But you may need to go just till March, so when the new council, when,
You can do it.
and then
Existing rotation and then.
rotate. Okay, that's fine. However you'd like to do it.
And the process, and has the council begun recruitment yet?
No.
And interviews? You should be.
They just started advertising.
Okay.
You just started, but as far as, deadlines and things like that.
Okay.
And there's actually, in the next city council agenda, is the request to spread it out, not have everything happen on the same year and the same month.
You mean not do the changeover in February?
Have it in March and September for all the different, not just I don't know what our commission is, but it was to look at evening out the commission recruitment period so that it doesn't happen as all 26 candidates happening
the
on
workflow.
one month.
Right, the interviews.
As was done last year.
That's why God created time, so everything doesn't happen at once.
Wow.
Exactly. Okay, and any potential future agenda items? I mean, the only thing I heard was from
Abby
about U-turn sign, but I don't think that's our.
It's not our
Oh, if you'd like, there's no.
I don't think
agenda items for.
I don't think it's for
coming
us.
from the commission, but I can go over our tentative agenda for the next couple
Well,
meetings.
that would be
if you'd
lovely.
like.
That would be
That'd be
good.
nice.
Just take a moment.
Thank
So, January 21st, we have a study session on 40 Main Street. And then we have the continued development review on 1540 Miramonte.
That's the same meeting.
So will we do one, and then the next one starts at
We'll do the
8?
study session.
Early?
Or is it
early,
at 6?
6.
And then we're going to have the other
And
thing
then-
at 7.
And then at 7, we'll go into the development review on 1540 Miramonte and the sign review for 1000 Fremont. February 4th, we have a study session for
Where's the 1,000 Fremont?
Signage.
sign review. There's a sign that by condition of approval for the building addition that was done in 1994-ish.
Where's 1,000 Fremont? I'm just trying to think where.
It's the clock tower building
Okay.
at Loyola.
Oh, okay.
So by condition, the sign has to be reviewed by the commission.
Okay.
So we're bringing you the sign. February 4th, 4880 El Camino Real study session. It's for a residential, mixed, multifamily residential on the old Hunan Homes restaurant site next to Jack in the Box.
Okay.
And then we have a use permit modification for the sweet shop, which is the little
on
building
Los
on
Altos
Los Altos Avenue at 994.
What's
February,
the request on that, David?
it's to,
Change hours?
it's to expand the number of seats in the outside patio.
And they don't have the parking to support it.
So,
Is that the issue?
no, as a store, its parking requirement has already been decided.
Okay.
This is really an operational question.
Okay.
Okay, and we have visibility further into February or not?
Feb 18, we might have a staff report on the state of the staff's efforts on traffic and potential commission traffic items.
That'd be great.
We're also looking forward to the citywide parking committee recommendation. Not sure if that's going to come in February or March.
That would be analogous to tonight's meeting?
Yes. So that's yet to be agendized, so we're not quite sure, but I'm
Might
hoping
be
that
late
those-
February, might be March.
February or March.
As early as we can get all the pieces together.
Yeah, so we're still working on that. So, and as soon as, we'll let you know as soon as we get that calendar to make sure we've got a fully staffed commission. And then in March, anticipate our reorganization.
Can I ask you some quick questions? Loyola's, the bridge over Loyola, or over the Foothill Expressway, is that on target?
It is supposed to be done this month.
And the Loyola Bridge on Fremont?
Excuse me, the
That
Fremont
bridge is
on-
the one that's supposed to be done this month?
Yes, our bridge on Fremont.
It's supposed
The
to.
counties, I don't know.
Okay.
No, they aren't even close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, and then I noticed the old Boardwalk building is in construction, which is great, as well as they started to level the site off at across from 960 San Antonio. And what else did I notice? Oh, yeah, we're all watching the First Street building, I'm sure, and it's getting closer, which is good.
And we have, for those of you who've been around a long time, we have Pinewood School, looks like it's
Is it? Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you.
getting
Is it
towards
done?
completion, right?
Phase 1.
Phase 1. Then are they going to leave it and then demolish the other one next
Yeah, it's 2 phases.
summer?
Second phase will be basically the site, they're keeping the existing house, and then everything around it will be getting out, and they'll move the students over to the completed first
Okay.
phase.
And where are we on Pilgrim Haven?
Oh, what's that?
Pilgrim Haven?
They did an extension for the third phase or whatever.
They're through, they got an extension through December 2016. Their target is September 2016.
Okay.
For phase,
For phase 3.
Which is the last phase, right?
so phase 2 is done now?
Phase 2 is done. Phase 3 is well underway. If you go by, it's framing
Yeah.
up. They're building up to the 3rd story at this point.
Okay.
So they're going fast and furious.
It's amazing how much stuff is getting built. It's really amazing.
Well, it's amazing that we approve things and then watch it happen.
It actually happens, yeah.
I do that for my life at work, and so does Bobby, so.
I get to see it. Okay. Without any other agenda items, I will
Boom.
Good job, Mike.
end this meeting.
An early end.
An early end. I did the last one at 8:30. This one's 10 to 10.
10 to 11.
10 to 11.